Welcome to the general debate on Lord Darzi's independent investigation into NHS performance. I call the Minister to move. Secretary of State.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to open this debate on Lord Darzi's investigation into the National Health Service. Not just so we can debate the past and what went so badly wrong, but so this House can also debate the future of our NHS, how it needs to change, and the many reasons to be optimistic about what our health service can be. We have to start with honesty. For too long, Conservative governments swept problems under the carpet, more interested in scapegoats than solutions. That's why I asked Lord Darzi to conduct an independent investigation into our National Health Service. He is an eminent cancer surgeon with 30 years' experience in the NHS. Yet what he found shocked even him. 100,000 toddlers and babies were left waiting for 6 hours in A&E last year. More than 1 in 10 hospital beds are taken up by patients who don't need to be there. Children are less healthy today than a decade ago. Adults are living longer but getting sicker sooner. Conditions like diabetes and high blood pressure are rising relentlessly. Mortality from preventable causes is far higher than in other advanced countries. Almost 3 million people are off work sick. Waiting lists are at record highs. Patient satisfaction at record lows. And the fundamental promise of the NHS, that it will be there for us when we need it, has been broken for a decade. Why? 4 knockout blows. First, a decade of underinvestment that sees NHS staff forced to use pagers and fax machines with fewer cancer scanners than Greece, and its buildings literally crumbling. Not to mention, Madam Deputy Speaker, the disgrace that the previous government's new hospital programme was written according to fictitious timetables, with the funding running out this coming March.
Shocking.
Second, Andrew Lansley's disastrous 2012 top-down reorganisation that nobody voted for, cost billions, took years, an enormous waste of time, talent and money that should have been spent caring for patients. Third, a failure to reform. The reforms made by the last Labour government, which delivered the shortest waiting times and highest patient satisfaction in history, were ditched. A golden inheritance squandered. Fourth, coronavirus. Lord Darzi found the NHS was hit harder than any other comparable healthcare system because of the damage the Tories had already done. It's not just that they didn't fix the roof when the sun was shining, they doused the house in petrol, left the gas on, and COVID just lit the match. That's why millions are stuck on waiting lists. That's why ambulances don't arrive on time. That's why people can't see their GP. Never forgive, never forget, never let the Tories do it again. I certainly will.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Lord Darzi's report was utterly damning about the treatment of children in our health system. He said too many are being let down. He pointed out that they account for 24% of the population but only 11% of NHS expenditure. And he pointed out that over 100,000 children are waiting over a year to be assessed for mental health treatment. So will he do, as Lord Darzi said, Darzi said we must do better. Will he commit to putting children front and centre of the 10-year plan and making them a priority because the Tories for a decade let our children down?
I strongly agree with the honourable member, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm going to talk about the 10-year plan shortly, but I can absolutely give her that guarantee that in terms of the profile of children and paediatric care, it will be front and centre in the 10-year plan. And there's much more we can do, both in terms of the spotlight we shine on paediatric waiting lists, but also what we do in practice. She mentioned mental health, children and young people's mental health. This is an area where our party and hers strongly agree. That's why we'll deliver our manifesto commitments to put mental health support in every primary and secondary school in the country, as well as walk-in services in every community, so that young people receive the mental health and wellbeing support that they need, so they don't reach the crisis point that far too many of our children do. And Madam Deputy Speaker, that intervention is why I'm looking forward to this debate. I hope to listen to contributions and challenge from all sides of the House. But before I take any interventions from those sitting on the Conservative benches, can I advise them, if they ever want to get a hearing on the NHS ever again, then the first word that should pass their lips is sorry. We didn't hear a single shred of remorse or contrition for their appalling record at their party conference held only last week. Indeed, when it comes to the Shadow Secretary of State and her party, it seems that sorry is the hardest word. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the NHS is broken. They don't want to accept it, but it is. And according to YouGov, that is what the vast majority of patients say. It's also what staff tell me every time I'm on the front line. But I do understand why some people find that phrase difficult. In the past few weeks, I've met some of the NHS team who happened to be on duty on Monday, the 29th of July. I've listened to paramedics describe the scene they walked into at that community centre in Southport. Children and adults who had been dancing to Taylor Swift, lying, bleeding, and in some cases tragically dying. The result of an unimaginable, senseless, mindless attack. Those paramedics had to make split-second decisions of who to treat, in what order, to give them the best chance of survival. Security teams cleared busy hospital corridors to shield as many people as possible from the horror. Lab teams mobilised blood supplies. Receptionists fielded calls from panic-stricken patients. Surgical teams across multiple hospitals worked together, fighting to save those young lives. And even now, mental health staff are picking up the pieces months later for those families that are either grieving or going through the unimaginable challenge of supporting their children through what they witnessed. On that day, those NHS responders, the whole team involved, were the best of humanity, confronting the worst. That is who NHS staff are. That is what they do. So let me be clear. The NHS may be broken, but NHS staff didn't break it. And I want to be clear about this too. What's broken can be fixed. While the NHS may be in the midst of the worst crisis in its history, the biggest asset we have are the people who work in it. They are up for the challenge and up for change. The NHS is broken, but it's not beaten. And together with the 1.5 million people working in the health service, this government will turn our NHS around, get it back on its feet, and make it fit for the future. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you very much for giving way. Across my constituency, my constituents are struggling to see the GPs that they need. And indeed, we're seeing that across the nation as a whole. And on Friday, I visited the Parkview surgery, where the GPs there do not have the resources, but now also can't move into the premises that they need to treat their patients. Can the Secretary of State assure me that he will follow Lord Darzi's recommendations, invest in primary care, so that my constituents get the GPs that they need, and so that the Parkview surgery can also move into the premises they need with the capital expenditure that they require?
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his intervention. Of course, it's not just in Loughborough that we have this challenge with access to general practice. It is right across the country. And I want to be clear, especially because GPs come in for a lot of criticism. Primary care may be broken, the front door to the NHS may be broken, but GPs didn't break it. And in fact, there are fewer GPs now than there were in 2015, and yet they are providing more appointments. They have worked hard to improve the productivity of general practice, but they are under-resourced, and that's why we are committed, as I told the Royal College of GPs just last week, to actually delivering the shift we need to see out of hospital into the community, growing primary care, including general practice as a proportion of the NHS's budget, so that we have the GPs that are needed to treat patients on time. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. Saturday was World Meningitis Day. But in the last year, we've seen an almost doubling of meningitis cases in the UK. Does he think that the meningitis vaccination take-up rate is where it should be?
I'm really grateful to the Honourable Member for her question. No, I don't think the take-up rate is where it should be, and that's why in the short time we've been in office we've put more effort and energy into vaccine take-up. But of course there is more to do, and I welcome her to the House and won't have a go at her for the record of the people that were sat on this side of the House only just before the general election. I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
Thank you to the Secretary of State for giving way. At the end of September, a large GP federation serving patients across Sussex suddenly went bust, causing 130 redundancies and patient care severely affected. The federation reported the cause being to obtain long-term contracts from any of its major clients and the erosion of real-term contract value at both primary care networks and with NHS Sussex. Does the Secretary of State agree with me that protecting a continuity of service is key to public confidence in primary care? And will he meet with me to discuss this particular case?
I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for her intervention. I wish this was only a challenge in her constituency. It is a challenge right across the country. And as I said to the Royal College of GPs last week, it will take time to rebuild general practice back to where we want it to be. We'd be delighted to hear more from the Honourable Member, and I'll make sure that my department makes contact so that a Minister can be in touch about the specific challenge in her constituency. And of course I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
I thank the Secretary of State for his statement today and indeed for this debate as well. And wish him well in this. This whole House, indeed this whole country, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, wishes you well in what you do in bringing forward the changes and the reports that we wish to see. Minister or Secretary of State, and one of the issues that comes to my attention regularly is research and development. We hear in the press every day, Madam Deputy Speaker, new advances for diabetes, for heart, for cancer, for Alzheimer's, for dementia, for rare diseases. When we look at the bigger picture of the NHS, we see the big problems, but sometimes these are smaller issues. But when it comes to research and development, can the Secretary of State guarantee and give us some reassurance when it comes to these things that our people will be encouraged as well? Thank you so much.
I strongly agree with the Honourable Member in his intervention, and of course, although health is devolved, I look forward to working constructively and closely with governments right across the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, because every part of the health system in every part of the UK is going through its challenges, and we're determined to do that. I think he wants to come in again.
The point I'm really getting to is when it comes to NICE recommendations, they come from here, they go to Northern Ireland, and then we endorse them. But if we don't get them from here to start with, then we can't cure and make people better. That's the point I'm trying to make. Sorry, apologies.
And his point is taken, Madam Deputy Speaker. The NHS now stands at a fork in the road. There is a choice before us, and there are different opinions on the best way forward held by parties represented in the House today. The first option is for the NHS to continue on its current path, heading down the road to ruin, mismanaged decline, a status quo so poor that patients are forced to raid their savings to go private, with the worst yet to come, because there are many on the benches opposite who believe all patients should have to put their hands in their pockets when they fall ill. Reform have openly stated they want to change the funding model and replace it with an insurance-based system. And plenty in the Conservative Party want to head in the same direction, chasing reform down the hard right rabbit hole. The Shadow Secretary of State says it's nonsense. She's very upset about it. So let me just point out to her that earlier this year, the former Conservative Dentistry Minister, a minister who served in her team under her leadership, was proposing a monthly £10 insurance fee to see a dentist. That's what they were planning before the election. And now the candidate to lead, if she wants to intervene, I'll give way.
I will happily intervene. That is simply incorrect. And there are a couple of points that he has made completely wrongly, which I'm going to have to correct him in my speech. He is no longer in opposition. He needs to be careful what he says on the record. That is not right.
I mean, honestly, Madam Deputy Speaker, brass neck and springs to mind. And once again, she gets to her feet and she fails to say the word sorry. If she wants to correct the record, how about she stands up and corrects the abysmal record that she and her predecessors lumbered this country with, taking the NHS from the very best it was left in 2010 to the very worst that she inherited. If she wants to talk humility, she might like to start demonstrating some before her time in office comes to an end. if she wants to distance herself from her former dentistry minister, let's turn to the candidate seeking to lead her party, who is head and shoulders above the rest with their membership, who wants to go even further. The Right Honourable Member for North West Essex told the Times newspaper last month that when it comes to whether the NHS should be free at the point of use, she said, and I quote, "I think we need to have a serious cross-party national conversation." That's what she said about whether the NHS should be free at the point of use. I suspect she's blamed the journalists for her own words since. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, just so we're clear on this side of the House, over my dead body, this Labour government will always defend our NHS as a public service, free at the point of use, so that whenever you fall ill, you never have to worry about the bill. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the problem isn't, and has never been, the fair, equitable model of funding. Of course, it is the same model we had in 2010, when the last Labour government delivered the shortest waiting times and highest patient satisfaction in history. A universal, single-payer health service is the fairest, most equitable way to provide healthcare. And more than that, in a way that could never have been predicted in 1948 with Attlee and Bevan, it makes the NHS the best-placed healthcare system the world has, for the revolution taking place today in genomics, technology and life sciences. The NHS has the right funding model, but it's not taking advantage of the opportunities in front of it. That's what we need to change, and I give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you. Poor investment and a lack of respect for workers in the sector of the NHS, in primary care particularly under the previous government, has meant that Portsmouth North has a ratio of over 3,000 patients per GP, which has resulted in over 1,800 people waiting more than a month for a GP. Despite this, Lord Darzi notes that many of the solutions needed can be found in parts of our NHS in our own constituency. Will the Secretary of State acknowledge the fantastic initiative and the hard work of GPs in Portsmouth North as they work alongside trainees from GPs from King's College London and look to push that across the country?
I'm really grateful to my honourable friend for her intervention because she's right. Whether it's in Portsmouth, right across the country, there are people who, against the backdrop of the previous government, have nonetheless tried to innovate, do things differently and improve service for patients, and I'm sure they're relieved, especially having sent her to represent them here in Parliament, that they now have a Labour government on their side. I'll give way to the former Minister.
Thank you very much, Secretary of State. Chapter 5 of Lord Darzi's report is about where and how the money should be spent, and I'm sure, coming from previous experience, I know there's a lot of money can be spent within the National Health Service. But would the Secretary of State agree with me that it has to be about investing to save? We can't simply move about the money that we currently have within the health service, that it needs that investment to actually allow us to go into the greater detail that Lord Darzi actually talked about, moving from analogue to digital, moving from primary care back into the community as well. That needs investment. It just can't be done with the simply of the budget itself.
I strongly agree with the former minister, and I will take that as a representation for the forthcoming budget and spending review and make sure his comments are sent straight across to my right honourable friend the Chancellor and my right honourable friend the Chief Secretary to the Treasury. I think, without preempting future fiscal events, we've been clear for some time that it's investment and reform that delivers results. That's how the last Labour government delivered the shortest waiting times and the highest patient satisfaction in history. And if people are in any doubt about what investment minus reform does, they need only look at what Darzi says about our hospitals, where after 2019, lots of resource was poured in, particularly in relation to staffing, but productivity fell. It's investment and reform that delivers results, and this Labour government will deliver both. I'll give way to you.
I thank him for giving way. One of the moments I will never forget before the last general election was turning up at Milton Keynes Hospital with my 92-year-old grandmother, who we suspected of having a heart attack, only to be told that the waiting time on average at that moment was 9.5 hours. And we have some of the longest NHS waiting lists in the country in Milton Keynes because of the damage that's been done by the last Tory government. Would you agree with me that we all deserve an apology from the Conservatives, not just for the state that they've left our NHS in, but also for going into the election promising a new hospital for Milton Keynes, even though they clearly did not have a plan for how they were going to deliver it.
I'm really grateful for that intervention. I was delighted to visit Milton Keynes Hospital with him before the general election. I think they are doing some incredible work there against the conditions that he describes, and in particular the innovation they show in terms of the application of smart, everyday, practical technology to improve patients' experience. It's to be commended. But can I say I share his anger and his constituents' anger and the anger of people right across the country in every community, including mine, by the way, where a new hospital or a hospital upgrade was promised. We were told there was a plan, we were told there was a timetable, and we were told that the programme was fully funded. And then we came into government to find that the timetables were a work of fiction and the funding runs out in March. That's something else the Shadow Secretary of State should apologise for. I'm looking forward to hearing her apology, because people across the country are owed an apology. And let me just say to every member of the House who's in the same position that I'm in, my honourable friend is in, and people across the country are in, we will not play fast and loose with the public's trust. We will come forward with a plan for the upgrade of those hospitals and those schemes which is credible, achievable and funded. That is the difference between the way that this Labour government will behave, both in terms of public trust and public money. And I think the way that the previous Conservative government behaved was a total disgrace. I'll give way to Robert Gentleman.
Secretary of State for giving way. And on top of coming clean to the public and changing the way the previous government have treated the country, would he also assure the House that the government will establish a proper and effective and honest workforce plan? Because what's happening within the service after the Johnsonian bluster of the previous years is there was no effective workforce plan, and the nurses who are the backbone of the NHS are still being paid grade 5 £29,000 a year, and as the RCN say, it's about retention, not just recruitment of staff, because they're leaving in their droves because they cannot stand the unsafe circumstances in which they're operating.
Yeah. I think the honourable member is right to raise the issue of both recruitment and retention. And my message, both to staff who are thinking of leaving the NHS, or maybe people who've left the NHS in recent years because of the conditions they were working in and because there was no light at the end of the tunnel, is to stay or indeed to return and help us to be the generation that takes the NHS from the worst crisis in its history to get it back on its feet and make sure it's fit for the future. And in terms of the workforce plan of the previous government, let me just say that it was regrettable that it was only at 5 minutes to midnight they published such a workforce plan. We were highly flattered by the fact that so much that underpinned that workforce plan were Labour Party policy commitments, whether doubling the number of medical school places or increasing the number of nursing and midwifery clinical training places. We are committed to those headline commitments. What we will inevitably want to do is to update the workforce plan in light of the 10-year plan and indeed some of the analysis that underpins Darzi. We are clear that that kind of long-term workforce planning is absolutely essential, and we're committed. I must make some progress. I'll try and take some more interventions shortly. The public are clear that they don't want the NHS to be sacrificed. They gave Labour our marching orders at the general election, which is to rescue the NHS and to turn it around, and that is what we will do. Now, I appreciate that the Shadow Health Secretary must be embarrassed by all of this, not just by the state that she and her Conservative predecessors left the NHS in, but also by what members, actually not sat behind her, but nonetheless Conservative MPs have been saying. I think they are hiding in shame.
They don't know the meaning of the word.
No, apparently the Shadow Health Secretary says from essential bits, we've already done this, we've already had this discussion. The Conservatives would just rather we moved on and forgot their abysmal record. Well, I'm afraid we're not ready to do that just yet. In fact, at least some of her own backbenchers now say what they refused to say when they were in office, that the NHS is broken. And some of them even admit only Labour can fix it. So when the Shadow Secretary of State stands up, I wonder if she can tell us if she agrees with the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk when he said, and I quote, "I applaud Wes Streeting for having the political courage. I think only Labour can really say this. The NHS is sort of their thing. I really hope that we can get behind him." But what about, it's not just the backbenchers, Madam Deputy Speaker, what about her Shadow Cabinet colleague, the Shadow Foreign Secretary, who said, and I quote, "I'm very supportive of what Wes Streeting is saying. The Conservative government put a lot of money into the NHS. The record is there for all to see. I'm not one of those who is seeking to attack the Labour Party on the NHS." Well, he's going for my vote, Madam Deputy Speaker, but sadly I'm not, well, in fact, gladly, I'm not qualified to vote in that particular election. So maybe the Shadow Health Secretary can tell us what the Shadow Foreign Secretary meant when he said we were not... what's the foreign... I can't... Can she tell us? She's clearly enjoying this. Was the Shadow Foreign Secretary speaking for the Shadow Cabinet? My favourite... No, he wasn't. The Shadow Foreign Secretary wasn't speaking for the Shadow Cabinet. So let me move on to my favourite comments from a Tory MP on the NHS, which were these. This member said, in fact, this right honourable member said, and I quote, "We were not obsessed with how we can ensure that it actually delivers the experience that patients actually deserve. Out of fear of our opponents mischaracterising our efforts, we shirked the difficult decisions. If Wes Streeting comes forward with genuine reforms, I think we should back him." Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, these are the words of the candidate she's backing to lead her party. So I wonder if she'd like to tell us, does she agree with the Right Honourable Member for Newark? Will she finally apologise for her part in their abysmal record? And will she finally have the humility to admit that actually, when it came to NHS reform, their cupboard was bare, and actually they quite agree with our efforts to clean up the mess that they left behind? Because for all the agreement with our diagnosis, all the praise of the plans, the problem is, Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no apology. 4 leadership candidates, 8 former health secretaries, not a single one has apologised for the state they left the NHS in. So I wonder if she would like to correct that record today and finally say sorry. I expect we might have to wait a long time. So while they continue the longest leadership election in history, we're getting on with the job of cleaning up their mess. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, Secretary of State. The reform that we desperately need includes the so-called left shift out of hospitals into primary care. And yet, under the last government, we saw the amount of money spent in hospitals go from 47% of the NHS budget to 58%. And every day in the NHS, according to Age UK, 2,000 people are admitted to hospital who could be treated elsewhere and earlier. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that the only way we're going to fix the NHS is getting more care in the community and better?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and that brings me on to our reform agenda. To deliver this government's reform agenda, we'll have to take on both left and right-wing orthodoxies. For simplicity's sake, we'll call them The Guardian and the Daily Mail. The Daily Mail agree on the need for health service reform, but attack proposals for public health reform as nanny state. The Guardian loves prevention, but all this talk about health service reform makes them very nervous. The truth is, the Daily Mail and The Guardian are half right and half wrong. But we all need to face up to the challenges of today. Our society is getting older, living longer, but becoming sicker sooner. And those rising tides of demands and costs are combining to form a perfect storm that threatens to shipwreck the NHS. So the right, and must make progress, so the right has to accept that without reform on public health, we'll pay a heavy price with higher taxes and poorer quality of life, exactly the sort of dependency culture they rail against. The left has to accept that investment without reform of the health service would be killing the NHS with kindness, with more cash and poor results until the public give up altogether. I've just got to make some more progress. That's the choice. It's public health reform or higher taxes, NHS reform or no NHS. The Tories did neither, Labour will do both. It really is reform or die, and we choose reform. And that's why this month we will begin formal engagement with NHS staff and patients, both of whom will help to write the 10-year plan for our NHS. A plan that will deliver the change and modernisation our health service is crying out for, with 3 big shifts in the focus of the NHS. First, from hospital to community, turning the NHS as much into a neighbourhood health service as a national health service, so patients get more of their tests, scans and healthcare on the high streets, in town centres, their own community, and from the comfort of their own home, making sure patients can easily book appointments to see the GP they want in the manner they choose, bringing back the family doctor, rebuilding NHS dentistry and building a national care service. Secondly, from sickness to prevention, I must make progress. I've got lots of speakers and little time. Taking action to give our children a healthier, happier life, flattening the curve of rising pressures that threaten to overwhelm the NHS by building a healthier society, helping to build a healthier economy. And third, from analogue to digital, upgrading the NHS app to give patients real choice and control over their own healthcare, creating a single patient record owned by the patient, shared across the system so that every part of the NHS has a full picture of the patient they treat. And getting the NHS working hand in glove with our country's leading scientists to put modern technology and equipment in the hands of NHS staff and to put patients at the front of the queue for the latest treatments. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, I must begin to conclude, but I can see the Chair of the Select Committee seeking my eye, and I'll be seeing her committee soon. So, given I know where my bread's buttered, I'll give way to the Honourable Member.
He's very kind indeed. I can take no credit for what I'm about to say because these are reports published under the last committee. But he'd do very well to look at the reports on prevention and indeed digital transformation that took place last year. What they say is very much echoed in Lord Darzi's report, and in particular the place-based narratives embedding the NHS into our communities is key. But so is reform of government as a whole and embedding health in every single department. Would he like to say perhaps a bit more about reform in government, not just reform in the NHS?
I strongly agree with the Chair of the Select Committee and commend the work of the previous committee that she refers to, and she's certainly given me some revision for the first meeting I'll be attending. To answer her question directly, I mean, she's absolutely right. First of all, digital transformation is key, so is place-based healthcare planning. This government will have a much sharper focus on health inequalities than the previous government. And in fact, if you look over the course of the NHS for the last 30, 40 years, even when the NHS overall has been performing very well and patients in every part of the country have received access to timely care, there have still been some health systems that have been more challenged than others, and I think we need to be honest about some of the structural challenges in those areas. And secondly, she's absolutely right that if we're serious about health and prevention, we need a serious cross-government approach, and that's why I'm delighted that the Prime Minister's mission-driven approach has seen government departments coming together already with a focus on prevention, and I think that will deliver fruit. This is the major surgery our National Health Service needs over the next decade to make it fit for the future. There's no time to waste, so we've hit the ground running. We inherited a Care Quality Commission that isn't fit for purpose. I was genuinely stunned to learn that 1 in 5 health and care providers have never been inspected. Some hospitals have been left uninspected for a decade, and inspectors were sent to care homes when they'd never met someone with dementia. The Conservatives didn't think patients would like the answers, so they'd stopped asking the questions. This Labour government is different. We'll be honest about the problems facing the health service and serious about solving them. Our policy is radical candour. Today I'm delighted to announce that Sir Julian Hartley has been appointed as the new Chief Executive of the CQC. He is a proven reformer with a track record of turning around large organisations, and I'm confident he will provide the leadership that staff in the CQC need to address this crisis, improve patient safety and restore confidence in the regulator. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, so this government is taking action to turn the regulator around. That's the difference a Labour government makes. Yeah. We inherited the farce of newly qualified GPs facing unemployment. Patients can't get a GP appointment while GPs couldn't get a job. So we cut red tape, found the funding, and we're recruiting an extra 1,000 GPs. That's the difference a Labour government makes. We've tabled a motion to ban junk food ads targeted at children, our first step towards making our country's children the healthiest generation that has ever lived. That's the difference a Labour government makes. And just this week, the Secretary of State for Science and Technology and I announced funding to produce new cutting-edge cancer treatments, a new blood test that can detect 12 different cancers, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're backing Britain's scientists to save lives. That's the difference a Labour government makes. And of course, strikes in the NHS have cost taxpayers billions. Patients saw 1.5 million operations and appointments cancelled. The Conservatives saw strikes as an opportunity to scapegoat NHS staff, so they let the strikes rage on. In fact, the Shadow Health Secretary hadn't even bothered to meet the junior doctors since March. This government doesn't exploit problems, we solve them. I called the junior doctors on day one, met them in week one, and in just 3 weeks we negotiated a deal to end the strikes. That's the difference a Labour government makes. And of course, Madam Deputy Speaker, these are just our first steps. Rebuilding the NHS won't be easy and it will take time, but we've done it before and we will do it again. Along with the millions of dedicated staff in health and social care across our country, this can be the generation that takes the NHS from the worst crisis in its history to build an NHS fit for the future. An NHS there for us when we need it, with world-class care for the many, not just the few. That's the change Britain voted for, that's the change we'll deliver together, and Madam Deputy Speaker, that change has already begun.
The question is that this House has considered Lord Darcy's independent investigation into NHS performance. And before I bring in the front bench speeches, members will be aware that we've got over 50 members wanting to speak in this debate. So I would ask people to help each other. And on this occasion, I will be imposing a 3-minute time limit, with the exception of maiden speeches and the Chair of the Health Select Committee after front bench speeches. So I call on Victoria Atkins as Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. On this, the first anniversary of Hamas's horrific attack on Israel, our thoughts are with Israel, the victims of that horrific attack, their loved ones, and with all of those who are trying to rescue the hostages, get aid where it is needed, and bring peace to the region. Madam Deputy Speaker, day 95 of this fumbling Labour government, and yet another general debate to talk about a report we talked about 3 weeks ago. That seems to be the golden, or should I say grey, thread running through this government. Lots of talk, but where is the action? If the Right Honourable Gentleman wanted to make a meaningful contribution to the nation's health today, why has he not brought forward the Tobacco and Vapes Bill for second reading this evening to help our children and bring about the first smoke-free generation? The bill is ready to go. Why isn't the government? Or he could have provided an update to the House on the 40,000 more appointments he promised so many times during the campaign, but which the latest written parliamentary question answer from his minister suggests is nowhere near happening. It is perhaps about as likely as the Prime Minister paying for his own glasses. Or he could have set out the steps that his department is taking to prepare the NHS for winter. In the spring, I asked the system to start planning for this winter. How many beds, how many ambulances and how many care packages has he put into the system to prepare it for winter? Or he could have set out the terms of the Royal Commission on Social Care today. We stand ready to help on this because we believe in constructive opposition, and yet we have heard nothing from this government. Or he could have launched the much-hyped 10-year plan, which before the election the Secretary of State promised was oven-ready, but appears in fact to be in the deep freeze. How many more government resets will there be before that 10-year plan is in fact launched? Instead, in the first 95 days, this Labour government has talked down the economy and the NHS, stopped new hospitals being built, scrapped NHS productivity improvements, overseen GPs entering industrial action, been exposed in a health cronyism scandal, and opened a dispute with hundreds of thousands of nurses and midwives. And they seek to justify all of this with the Darzi report. This report, by a former Labour health minister, has sunk as quickly as it was briefed out. It looks backwards, but not far enough to mark the last Labour government's policy and operational failures. Because if this government is serious about reforming the NHS, and I genuinely hope it is, then it and the Secretary of State need to transition quickly from opposing to governing. And this must begin, I'm just going to finish this must begin with the language he is choosing to use about the NHS. And we've seen a little bit of nuance tonight, interestingly, for the first time, perhaps because health leaders are raising concerns that his broken narrative is damaging public confidence and will lead to people not coming forward for care. That was reported on the day the Right Honourable Gentleman was giving his speech to conference, and it is hurting the morale of staff who are working tirelessly for their patients. Just as the confected doom and gloom of the new Chancellor is damaging business confidence, so too does the Health Secretary's relentlessly negative language risk consequences in real life. So let me say what the Health Secretary refuses to acknowledge. The NHS is here for us and is ready to help. Its dedicated staff look after 1.6 million people a day, a 25% increase than in the days of the last Labour government, which is why I'm always a little bit concerned when the Honourable Gentleman keeps harking back so far, because I don't think he's quite understood the change in capacity and scale of the National Health Service since we inherited it from the last Labour government. And the majority of those people will receive good care. These are just facts. These are just facts, and I know he finds them difficult to receive. Just one more. Of course, and this is important, of course we must focus relentlessly on those patients who do not receive good care. But that won't be achieved by writing off the 1.5 million people who work in the NHS. In fact, the NHS has more doctors, nurses and investment than at any point in its history. It is delivering millions more outpatient appointments and diagnostic tests and procedures for patients than in 2010. And NHS mental health services are supporting 3.6 million people a year, a 10% increase in 1 year alone. I will give way to the doctor behind me, and then I'll give way.
Or to the Shadow Secretary. And it's interesting that Lord Darzi chose to choose 2010 because there were some good points the Labour government had put in place, but there was also the problem of mid-staffs. We had the MTAS fiasco around medical careers, in which Patricia Hewitt had to come apologise. We had the £11 billion IT project that was put in place that has now failed as well. This shapes the NHS, and when you're trying to come up with solutions, this impacts on the way doctors, leaders and politicians come together. So does she have a reason of how we can take the politics out of this debate to be able to have a sensible debate on reform, which I think both sides of this House would like to see?
May I thank my honourable friend who brings his clinical experience and expertise to this debate. I say frankly to the honourable gentleman, the right honourable gentleman, that I wish he had taken the approach of the Defence Secretary. Because the Defence Secretary has set up a cross-party commission on defence spending, and indeed he has invited my former colleagues to sit on that review, because the Defence Secretary understands that we bring an enormous amount of knowledge, experience, dare I say also some hard knocks, working in these massively complex departments. And had the right honourable gentleman, he knows me, we've done good-humoured battle over the dispatch boxes over a long time now, had he come to me and asked me to help him, I genuinely would have. So the patients are listening. Sorry, the public are hearing this. They want politicians to cut all the flim-flam and the bluster and work together. And had the right honourable gentleman been serious about this report, he would have done exactly as his colleague around the cabinet table would have done and conducted a cross-party review of the NHS so as to ensure that we could make real progress. And it's interesting that the Health Secretary does not appear to agree with the approach that his fellow cabinet colleague has taken. I will listen to the honourable gentleman because I know, I'm very generous with interventions. I know that he brings experience into the House as well.
Grateful that you have given way, and thank you for that. I have been sitting listening to you, and I'm sorry, I'm getting the hang of this. To be honest, I'm struggling to recognise what you're talking about. What the honourable lady is talking about. The state of the health service is a disgrace. This opposition over there, who were, I believe, the government until quite recently, have totally messed the situation up over a period of 14 years. And I think that what Lord Darzi has had to say is a pretty accurate diagnosis of the situation that we're in. Yeah. So it's quite surprising to listen to my honourable Shadow Secretary of State talk as if everything were perfect over the last 4 years. This is simply not the case.
So, I'll help the honourable gentleman because I appreciate he's news to this place. If he had been listening carefully to me, he would have heard that I am absolutely, and always have been, and in fairness, I hope the right honourable gentleman would acknowledge this as well. I've always been very open with the fact that the NHS needs reform. In fact, I said, as Secretary of State, I want to reform our NHS to make it faster, simpler and fairer. And by the way, I speak with personal experience, because I know there are some on the benches behind who are new to this place and perhaps haven't quite moved on from the natural competitiveness that there is in a general election campaign. But I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 3. I have seen the very best of the NHS, but I've also seen some of its darkest corners. The NHS is genuinely one of the reasons I came into politics. And one of the most damaging things, I think, about political discourse and the healthcare system in this country is when people seek to attribute a lack of care or a lack of commitment to our healthcare system as just because we have different ways and different solutions for how we may tackle these things. So this is why, again, and I will say it again because I'm not sure the right honourable gentleman is listening, I will work constructively with him to improve the health service. But we have to do this on the facts. And some of the suggestions that the right honourable gentleman has said today in the debate and in his discourse during the general election campaign and so on are not accurate. And this is where I will pull him up. So, for example, he hasn't mentioned the introduction of Pharmacy First, or the 160 community diagnostic centres, which, just to help him, was backed by the largest central cash investment in MRI and CT scanning capacity in the history of the NHS. And those, as well as the new surgical hubs that we introduced, are not only putting healthcare into the community, but also critically helping to improve the numbers of chest checks and scans that are going through the system, which means speedier diagnosis. I will give way.
She mentions Pharmacy First. How many went bust on her watch?
As the right honourable gentleman knows, because he will have got, I imagine, exactly the same briefing I used to get when I was in his shoes, being advised by exactly the same civil servants. We have still the average person within England and Wales, and I'm having to flow back into my memory here, the average person in England is able to, is within walking distance of their pharmacy. He will know that there are many high streets in our market towns, in London, in other urban areas, where there is a density of pharmacies, and we want to support those pharmacies to ensure that they are able to provide the services that they can provide and to give, and in fairness, to enable pharmacists to work at the top of their licences. He supported Pharmacy First when I introduced it, so I'm a little bit surprised that he appears to be casting doubt on it. But he also, when he intervened on me, and I'm grateful for that intervention, the next point I was going to make was also that our women's health strategy, which has not had the attention from his ministerial team that it should have at the moment, I hope that will improve over the coming months, but that women's health strategy has seen the rollout of women's health hubs across England into every ICB area by the end of this year, ensuring that women's health issues receive the attention they deserve. Now, of course, there are parts of the NHS that need to change and do much better. The NHS needs to reform for the future of healthcare, and our focus must be on improving outcomes for patients, not protecting the structures, bureaucracy and vested interests in the NHS. And as I have said repeatedly, we will scrutinise constructively and support any meaningful efforts to reform the NHS so as to improve outcomes and experiences for patients, because we all want the NHS to thrive. But after nearly 100 days, there has not been anything yet for us to scrutinise or indeed support from this government. Interesting, he says he's just given me a list. I'm pretty sure 3 out of the 4 were started under my government. I'm pretty sure I was the Secretary of State that ordered the review into the CQC precisely because I was so concerned. And that is and so he is able to build on that report, quite rightly so. But do be careful, please. The Right Honourable Gentleman should be careful of his facts. Because, as I say, after nearly 100 days, there has been nothing yet for us to scrutinise or indeed support from this government. Disappointingly, it is the Right Honourable Gentleman's fondness for parties and concerts that has made the news recently, rather than his health policies. This government needs to sober up and start taking responsibilities for their choices. I had an intervention over there.
Thank you for giving way. On Saturday, I had a surgery appointment with a young lady who has struggled to access support for her eating disorder and mental health issues. She's gone through some of the most difficult experiences that anybody can go through. And she asked me a simple question, which is, why have I been unable to access NHS support for my mental health? What would she say to my constituent who, when she looks back at the reasons, frankly, blames her government?
All right. Well, first of all, I'm very, very sorry to hear that. And again, the way that we were trying to deal with the enormous increase that we have seen in mental ill health across our country was to, first of all, boost mental health services for children and young people. And indeed, he may not be aware, but we've rolled out mental health support teams across nearly 45% of schools. We wanted to complete that to 100% of schools by the end of the decade. I very much hope that the Secretary of State will be taking that policy and delivering it. But in terms, particularly with eating disorders, he may know that since the pandemic, there seems to have been a real increase in eating disorders. We know that, for example, the impact of social media sites and the algorithms that sit behind social media sites can lead people who are already feeling very vulnerable into even darker places. And so when the Right Honourable Gentleman says this should be a cross-government piece of work, I very much agree with him. I hope that he will achieve that through his mission board. But we really do have to look at how we as a society are able to deal with some of these causes, because I don't think anyone is happy with the situation that we've seen such a huge increase in the anxiety and mental ill health of our young people since the pandemic. Now, I will, yes.
Can I thank the Shadow Minister as well for that? Shadow Minister, one of the things that came up at our party conference just there some time ago was a recommendation with the BMA and GMC, and they were putting forward a suggestion of encouraging medical students into local trusts by paying their fees, which usually pays for itself when you look at the cost of locum doctors at each of our health trusts. Would the Shadow Minister support that, and would the Shadow Minister in turn encourage government to do likewise? Thank you.
I hope the honourable friend knows by now that I will, when he makes the suggestion, I will take it away. He'll appreciate that as a constructive opposition, I want to look carefully at the ramifications, both the intended and unintended consequences of policies suggested here in the Chamber. But that sounds very, very interesting, and I thank him for his contribution as always. I'm going to make some progress. Now, one of the choices that faces the Health Secretary is whether he will fight for the investment required from the Treasury to implement the productivity plan. At spring budget, the Conservatives announced more than £3.4 billion of investment to upgrade IT systems, expand services on the NHS app, and make better use of AI to reduce bureaucracy for staff and free up clinical time for doctors and nurses. Alongside the long-term workforce plan, the first ever in the history of the NHS, this plan will see productivity grow by 2% a year by the end of the decade and unlock £35 billion worth of savings. Yet the productivity plan is not mentioned anywhere in this 163-page report. This plan was made in partnership with NHS England and funded by the Conservative government. While the Right Honourable Gentleman has talked a good game on productivity, we're still waiting for him to confirm his commitment to deliver this plan that was drawn up with NHS England to help improve productivity. I asked the Right Honourable Gentleman 3 weeks ago whether he was cancelling this plan. He failed to answer, and I'm very much happy to give way now if he wants to commit it. The whole of the NHS would like to know.
Did the Shadow Secretary of State so generously given way? I'm not going to preempt the Chancellor's announcements at the budget and the spending review, but what I will say to her is that the reason why so many things that she said at this dispatch box as Secretary of State were a pile of nonsense is because they were plans built on a pillar of sand, a £22 billion black hole for which she and her party are yet to apologise. Will she do that now?
As the Right Honourable Gentleman know, the calculations made in the Treasury for this economic inheritance, well, the Treasury can't even explain how they've arrived at those calculations. So I'd be a little bit careful if I were him and relying on that figure, because I fear it may trip his Chancellor up in due course. But perhaps the reason that the Right Honourable Gentleman can't answer the question as to whether or not he is in fact committed to the productivity plan is because his friend, the former Health Secretary, who has been walking in and out of the Department of Health with all of his private healthcare businesses, hasn't told him whether or not he plans to accept it. We'll find that out in due course. And his silence continues with new medicines, technology and trials. These will be at the forefront of the reforms needed in health services across the world, let alone the NHS. Yet the Darzi report mentioned NICE only once in 163 pages. Even worse, I am hearing from the life sciences sector that the Right Honourable Gentleman and his team are refusing to meet these businesses, putting at risk the hundreds of millions of pounds of investment the Conservative government secured, as well as the highly skilled jobs they provide and the life-enhancing treatments they promise our constituents. It is his responsibility to persuade the Chancellor to continue supporting and investing in this innovation for the future, because patients will not thank Labour if it refuses to engage in the medical revolution with these businesses. Now, another choice he must make, and we perhaps have a precursor of what he's going to say to this, concerns the workforce. We know that NHS staff are at the heart of our healthcare services. Training, retaining and developing our workforce are critical to the future of the NHS. The Conservative government created the first ever long-term workforce plan for the NHS, again, a plan asked for and welcomed by the whole of the NHS, developed hand in hand with NHS England to train the doctors, nurses, midwives and other healthcare staff we need now and in the future. This plan was described by NHS England's chief executive as one of the most seminal moments in our 75-year history. Crikey, even the Right Honourable Gentleman supported it. Yet this supposedly independent investigation failed to mention the plan once. Can the Right Honourable Gentleman confirm that this government stands by this plan and will fund it, as the Conservatives will do? He did not. He says he talked about it. He did not give an answer, because his job is to ask the Chancellor for this funding. Has he done so? Right, OK, well, we have that on record now. We'll wait and see what happens at budget. It is also striking that the report mentions pay and wages only twice in 163 pages, despite the fact that staff costs account for 65% of provider operating costs a year. If this report and the Secretary of State don't acknowledge the single biggest cost pressure for providers, then how can they claim to have the answers on reform? Now, he claims to have sorted out industrial action in the NHS. And I must again correct him on something. He keeps referencing when I last had a conversation with the Junior Doctors Committee, as it then was. What he neglects to tell us is that we entered mediation with junior doctors in May. He never thinks to mention that when he's holding, as he's holding forth at the dispatch box. And we entered into that negotiation in good faith. And I would gently remind Labour members of Parliament who were here before the last election, I asked again and again both the Right Honourable Gentleman and Labour MPs to condemn these strike actions, and they refused to do so because we know of their links with their union paymasters. But he claims, when I asked him at Health Orals in July, I'll just say train drivers and leave that. I'll just say train drivers and leave that hanging in the air. When I asked him at Health Orals in July, whether he was going to cut services or the Chancellor was going to raise taxes for the junior doctors' pay rise, he assured the House that any pay rise would be affordable. How affordable does his deal look now? He has given resident doctors an inflation-busting pay rise for being on strike. The days they were on strike, he's paying them for. He did that with no reform and no productivity improvements attached to it, and with more strikes threatened for next spring. Completely foreseeably, this has led to nurses and midwives asking why they should accept less, and simply telling nurses, "We're on your side," will not heat their homes this winter. But this report does not deal with the here and now. It only looks at the past. Indeed, the Darzi report talks about the importance of capital investment. So if, as he has said, the Right Honourable Gentleman intends to use the report to inform his policy decisions, why is he stopping new hospitals from being built? There are now 24 hospitals whose futures are at risk, despite commitments from the Right Honourable Gentleman and Labour candidates during the election campaign. Labour candidates in Watford, Hillingdon, Milton Keynes, Leeds and Basingstoke made promises to their voters that are now at risk under this Labour government. Patients in Chelsea and Fulham, Truro, Harlow, Plymouth and Kettering won't get the investment and upgrades they deserve, despite the promises of their Labour candidates. And don't believe a word when this Secretary of State says, as he's just saying now, he says it's because of the economy. The truth is the Right Honourable Gentleman had been planning to pause these hospitals since May 2023. The details, for those who are wondering, the details are in his Health Mission paper, which was published to great fanfare in May 2023. Page 6, if that helps. So he was planning this since May last year, which is exactly why the promises made at the election were so cynical and now need to be revealed. And take perhaps an unhealthy dose of salt to his claim that the money only runs until March next year. Let me help this very inexperienced Secretary of State understand basic Treasury rules. The comprehensive spending review period finishes in March. I wish I could have bound this Labour government to committing to those hospitals in the next CSR, but I could not. And so it is his responsibility, his role, to fight for this funding from the Chancellor to ensure that these hospitals are built. We promised that we would allocate the money needed. We prioritised these new hospitals in the next CSR. It is for this government, it is for this Secretary of State, it is his job to secure the money now from his Labour Chancellor. And our plans to invest in more capital projects also sought to improve cancer diagnosis and treatment. While outcomes have improved since 2010, there is much more to do, which is why we opened 160 community diagnostic centres, rolled out new lung cancer screening programmes and expanded the use of AI to speed up diagnoses. Again, we note the lack of any mention of these centres or hubs to reduce waiting lists and speed up diagnoses in this supposedly independent review by the former Labour Health Minister. But I want a straight answer from the Minister in their wind-up on an issue which is worrying families up and down the country. Cancer is the single biggest killer of children under the age of 14. I launched the Children and Young People's Cancer Task Force to bring together top clinicians, leading cancer charities and the government to combat childhood cancer, including improving diagnoses and access to new treatments. It was warmly welcomed by parents and charities when it was launched, and experts were lending their time to the task force for free. Let me finish this point. Yet this Secretary of State has chosen to pause it. Parents and charities, including Teenage Cancer Trust, Young Lives versus Cancer and Solving Kids Cancer UK, cannot understand why the Health Secretary has chosen to stop this work. That is his choice, and the Minister must please explain in wind-ups why that decision has been taken to pause it. I'll give way to the Honourable Lady there.
The Right Honourable Lady makes a point about cancer being the biggest killer of people under 40. Actually, glioblastoma brain tumours are the biggest killer of people under the age of 40. Could the Honourable Lady tell me what progress there has been in the last 30 years in the treatment and diagnosis of glioblastoma brain tumours?
Well, may I thank the Honourable Lady? She misheard. I think she didn't hear me. I was talking about, I said it's a fact that cancer is the biggest killer of children under the age of 14, not 40. I know only too well how that terrible, terrible brain cancer has hurt her family and the great loss that she has suffered. I hope she has the ambitions, I know she does in fact, for the cancer, for the work that we were doing to try to get cancer treatments out, particularly new cancer treatments out to patients as quickly as possible if they were towards the end of their lives. But of course, anything that this government does to help people such as her sister, we will of course support, because again, I come back to it, we all want this to work. I'm going to make some progress, because I know I'm trying Madam Deputy Speaker's patience. So I'll turn to prevention. As Lord Darzi says, prevention is better than cure. We agree. The government also say they are committed to prevention, but actions speak louder than words. Scrapping the winter fuel payment for millions of pensioners will undoubtedly come at a cost to the NHS. Their equality analysis estimates that 780,000 of the most vulnerable pensioners who are eligible for pension credit will miss out this winter. And the cut will result in 262,000 pensioners needing NHS treatment because they are living in cold, damp homes at an additional cost of £169 million in a year. How has the Secretary of State stood by as the Chancellor makes this appalling decision that will affect vulnerable pensioners in his constituency as well as the NHS? And finally, with the words that the Right Honourable Gentleman has used about the NHS in England, it is surprising to say the least that he has not extended those same words times 100 for the state of the NHS in Labour-run Wales. On almost every measure, the NHS performs the worst in Wales. 1 in 4 people are on an NHS waiting list. It has the longest waiting times, and Welsh patients wait on average 7 weeks longer than in England. More than 23,000 people are waiting longer than 2 years compared to just 120 people in England. Given his rhetoric about the NHS England, why hasn't he asked Lord Darzi to take a cold, hard look at how Labour have run the NHS for 25 years? In conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, we Conservatives want to support good reforms and good policies for the better health of the nation. But this backward-looking report will not improve productivity. Headlines will not drive better outcomes for patients, and speeches won't improve the life chances of our constituents. This government needs to move from words to action, and to do so quickly.
Debbie Abrahams.
Deputy Speaker, and I'll be very brief. I think there is general consensus really in terms of Lord Darzi's review of the issues that are facing the NHS. But I wanted to start by, because in spite of what the Shadow Minister was saying, staff morale is really low and has never been as low as it is now. Compared to what it was in 2010. How grateful I am, and solidarity and gratefulness, as I say, to all the staff, clinical and non-clinical, for the work that they do. But I want to very briefly focus on the key drivers, which we've heard a little bit about from the Health Secretary, particularly in terms of the 2012 Health and Social Care Act. I sat on both of the committees in relation to that, and was aghast as somebody that had just come out from the NHS facing this, and I just knew it was going to be catastrophic, and it was. And as I say, an impact on staff morale almost immediately. Between 2010 and 2018, we must also recognise the impact of austerity. NHS revenue budgets grew by just 1% a year, the lowest level since the NHS was formed, comparing to nearly 4% a year since then. In 2010, we know that the Commonwealth Wealth Fund found that the NHS is one of the top-ranking health systems in the world, number one as far as equity and access to healthcare. Now we're ranked 10th. If we look at comparability of healthcare funding, we're ranked 26th in the OECD. But of course, not only did austerity impact on the NHS, but in terms of the overall funding, but in terms of the funding allocation formulas as well. The waiting for deprivation was slashed. So areas like mine received less money, where we had more health needs. Austerity also had an impact on other aspects of public funding, local government, with again metropolitan areas like mine being particularly badly affected, and it stripped the support for people in need. I will very briefly.
Thank you. I came into politics because of a desire to reverse growing inequalities in health and disability. Within my constituency of Shipley, there is a 10-year gap in healthy life expectancy between someone living in Wharfdale and the neighbours over the moor in Windhill. While lots needs to be done to tackle poor housing and poverty, there are things the NHS can do. Does my honourable friend agree that the NHS plan must prioritise prevention as well as just treating sickness?
As a former public health consultant, I'd obviously agree with my honourable friend, and I have a similar, across Oldham, a similar health inequalities gap. I was going to go on to say, in terms of the impact of other aspects of social security, include social security cuts, which meant that we've had a greater level of poverty, including in-work poverty, children from working families living in poverty, and as a consequence of that, the impact that that's had on our health as a whole. We have a flatlining life expectancy, and again, in areas like mine, it's actually got worse. And the impact that this also has on our productivity and the wealth in the country. Very briefly, if I could mention a couple of things that I know my right honourable friend recognises, but he might want to also to consider. An annual State of our Health and a State of our NHS report presented to Parliament before each budget, so that they would pick up on the points that have been said about cross-departmental impacts on health. A prospective assessment of the impacts of the budget and finance bill on poverty, inequality, and subsequently on our health and our NHS. This can be done, others are doing it. A strategy to identify and address the issues of health equity in the NHS. We've seen a bit of this from COVID, and for example, the inequity around oximeters and how they're used. Making sure that we introduce something like improving working lives for our staff. This had a massive effect on staff when I worked in the NHS. And a clear commitment to the 1948 principles of the NHS. It's funding from general taxation and funding allocation based on need. Thank you so much, everyone.
I call the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, Helen Morgan.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The findings in Lord Darzi's report are shocking, but to Liberal Democrats on these benches, there are many of us here today. They echo the hundreds of thousands of conversations we had with people on the doorstep right across the country throughout the election campaign. In too many ways, the NHS just isn't working the way that it should, and that's a tragedy because we all cherish the NHS and we all want it to succeed. It's one of our country's greatest inventions, a great liberal idea, one of the things that makes us proud to be British. We all owe so much to the NHS and the incredible hard-working staff who have kept it going under the most intense pressure imaginable. But despite their heroic efforts, there is no doubt that we have a major crisis in the NHS. And let's not forget, because it's so important, they are intrinsically linked, a major crisis in care as well. Yeah. And the message the British people sent at the general election in July was very, very clear. Fixing the health and care price crisis must be this government's #1 priority. Now, before I turn to the government's plans, it's worth reminding ourselves of both the scale of the challenge and the urgency of tackling it. Far too many people are waiting weeks to see a GP or an NHS dentist, if they can find one. Far too many are waiting months or even years to start vital treatment for serious conditions. And far too many people are waiting for hours in pain and distress for an ambulance to arrive. I recently spoke to a constituent, Emma, whose 11-year-old daughter, Charlotte, suffers from a medical condition, which means she is red flagged or a Category 1 priority patient in the case of a medical emergency. Unfortunately, both Emma and Charlotte were recently involved in a car crash. Charlotte urgently needed an ambulance, but after 2 hours of waiting, her father decided to take her to hospital in the back of his car instead. As she starts her new journey into senior school this autumn, her family have had to devise their own response network to keep her safe and secure and allow her to attend school in confidence. Our ambulance service failed Charlotte and her family when they were in crisis, and we cannot let this continue. And the problems don't stop here. Across the country, almost 6.5 million people are stuck on hospital waiting lists. That's 1 in every 9 people in England. 1 in 9. 2 million of them have been waiting for more than 6 months. And on cancer, over the last year, more than 100,000 people waited more than 2 months to start cancer treatment after an urgent referral. In my constituency of North Shropshire, almost 20% of urgent referrals took more than 43 days and 10% over 62 days. The target is 28. This is truly heartbreaking. We know that every day counts for patients battling cancer. Young people needing help with their mental health are waiting months and even years to access CAMS. There's no help for them until they are in crisis. And as if all that weren't bad enough, we have hospitals that are literally crumbling, a maintenance backlog of £11.6 billion, buildings that are decades past their use-by date. Shocking, but as I and my Liberal Democrat colleagues know, far from exceptional. The roots of these problems go back decades. The truth is that governments of all parties have failed to put enough capital investment into the NHS, failed to face up to the challenge of an ageing population, and crucially, failed to tackle the care crisis. Yeah. With one honourable exception, the Care Act, passed by Liberal Democrat ministers a decade ago, with cross-party support, but which was sadly ripped up by the Conservative government after 2015. But it's the failure of neglect of the last Conservative government that has left the NHS teetering on the brink. So many grand promises, 6,000 more GPs, 40 new hospitals, cross-party talks on social care, but they were all fantasies. In Shropshire, which is not an outlier, the Royal College of GPs found that the average GP is seeing 475 more patients than they were in 2016. Patients and their loved ones have been let down so badly. When the scale of challenges across health and care is so enormous, it would be easy to succumb to pessimism and defeatism, doom and gloom, but we can't afford to do that. The patients of today and of tomorrow cannot afford for us to do that. This moment demands the same urgency, ambition and vision that drove the creation of the NHS all those years ago. And now we very much hope that the government will show that ambition, and I welcome the Secretary of State's recognition today of the fundamental importance of shifting more focus to primary care, to GPs, to dentists, and to mental health practitioners for our young people, and to community pharmacists. I will give way.
Thank you. As the newly appointed spokesperson for the Liberal Democrats on mental health, I was really concerned in this report to see that mental health is about 20% of the NHS burden, yet receives only 10% of the funding. And certainly in Winchester, and it'll be the same for nearly everyone here, mental health, especially the mental health of children, is one of the most commonly brought up subjects. I know the Secretary of State agrees with me that mental health and physical health need to be treated at the same level of importance. And so I just urge that we recognise that we can't treat it at the same level of importance if it doesn't get the level of funding that the demand is putting onto it. But it's not just about funding, it's also making sure that the other support is needed for mental health, like in schools, in social care, in the people struggling with debt. There's so many non-medical factors that contribute to mental health that we need to have sort of cross-department look at how we support people's mental health.
Well, my honourable friend is exactly right, and we put mental health and access to primary care and health prevention front and centre of our manifesto for that very reason. And I would encourage the Secretary of State to take our plans where they are complementary to his and run with them. We are happy to have our ideas plagiarised. We will welcome it. But welcome as that focus is, some of what we've heard gives me some cause for concern. First is the suggestion that the Prime Minister made some weeks ago that investment can only come after reform. I must warn the Secretary of State, I don't think that will work. The reforms our NHS needs can't be done on the cheap. Improving access to primary care means investing in more GPs, more NHS dentists and more community pharmacists. Boosting productivity means investing in better IT systems, bringing hospitals up to date with the new facilities they need. So I agree, it cannot just be more investment without those reforms, but nor can it just be reform without more investment. We need that investment now. So the reports we've heard of potential cuts to spending in the budget are deeply concerning, and I urge the Secretary of State today to guarantee that that won't be happening. And finally, I'm afraid that there still doesn't seem to be anywhere near enough focus or urgency when it comes to care. We simply cannot fix the crisis in the NHS without fixing the crisis in care. Right now, there are more than 12,000 people in hospital who are ready and well enough to go home, but they're stuck there because the care they need isn't available. 12,000 people. That's awful for them and their families. And it's awful for the NHS that 12,000 beds that could and should be used for getting better patient flow through a hospital for patients who need them are held up because the care system is in crisis. So I urge the Secretary of State again, don't put this off any longer. Set up a cross-party commission now so we can agree a long-term solution to make sure that people get the care they need, when and where they need it, and that carers are properly supported too. I will give way.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I support what she's saying about a cross-party group to look at social care. I think it's a sensible long-term thing that we need to look at, and that discharges from hospital is an important part of that. Would you also agree that discharges from mental health units are also an important part of that? On a recent visit to Basildon Hospital, I saw that the discharges were not happening for those mental health units, also preventing some of those issues around mental health social care as much as it is for perhaps those older social care, which the House is more attuned to.
Honourable gentleman for his intervention. I think there is a general problem with care of all types in the community, that it just isn't there for people. And so we have people in the places where they aren't going to get better as quickly, where their situation is sometimes deteriorating because that care isn't available. And mental health provision, certainly in my constituency, is absolutely appalling. It's shocking. People register with a dentist, with a doctor over the border just to access that better mental health care. I couldn't agree with him more. So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Darzi report is shocking, but it's not surprising based on the experience of my constituents. Poor access to primary care, whether that's GPs, dentists or early mental health intervention, is leaving people in pain and distress. Long waiting lists and crumbling hospitals are leaving people unable to get back to work, their situation deteriorating. And the crisis in social care, the elephant in the room, is depriving people of their independence and leaving them in hospital when they could be at home. The new government must make fixing the NHS and care its #1 priority, and Liberal Democrats will be here to provide the constructive opposition to make sure it does. Thank you.
Leader speech, Ben Goldsborough.
Madam Deputy Speaker, it's a profound honour to rise here today as the newly elected Member of Parliament for South Norfolk. The privilege to represent the people of this constituency is not something I take lightly. I look forward to working with my colleagues across the House to ensure their voices are heard and their needs are addressed. At the outset, I would like to take a moment to pay tribute to my predecessor, Mr Richard Bacon, who served South Norfolk for over 2 decades. Mr Bacon's tireless commitments to the constituency, particularly his efforts to champion the cause of self-built homes, has left a lasting legacy. His work in advocating for those who wish to take control of their own housing future has empowered many in our region and across the country to realise their dreams of home ownership. While the joys of representing South Norfolk is the opportunity to stand up for its wonderfully unique places, each with names as memorable as the community behind it, from Newton Flotman to Sacklingham Nethergate to Tackleston to the intriguingly named Three-Cocked Hat. Our constituency is a patchwork of distinct and vibrant villages. It's often said in jest that things are normal for Norfolk. We all know what those connotations are. But I want to challenge that label today. In fact, if you look closely at what's happening in South Norfolk, you'll find anything but normal, but in the best sense of the word. We're home to some of the most cutting-edge research and innovation in the world, all based at the Norwich Research Park, right in our own backyard. And I was so pleased to hear what the Secretary of State said on innovation on science and research and development, because we have some of those based in South Norfolk, and it will be a delight for them to hear. The Quadram Institute is at the forefront of research into our food science and gut health, shaping the future of nutrition and medicine. The John Innes Centre is world-renowned for its plant science and microbiology. The Sainsbury's Laboratory continues to lead the way in plant pathology and molecular biology. And there's Tropic, an ambitious company that started in Norfolk that's engineering new generation of tropical plants. Resilient in both disease and looming threats to climate change, their work isn't just benefiting South Norfolk or even the UK, it's having a global impact, ensuring food security and agricultural sustainability for future generations. Heck, Tropic work means that in 3 or more years' time, you may be eating bananas that were grown in Norfolk. Not something many people would have imagined. So far from being normal, South Norfolk is actually the hub of scientific innovation and global leadership in fields that define the future of our planet. And dare I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that this is something of which we can be tremendously proud. It would be remiss of me if I didn't mention another gem of South Norfolk, Lotus Cars. A symbol of British excellence in engineering. From their headquarters in Hethel, Lotus has been creating iconic sports cars for over 70 years. Celebrated for their precision, innovation, performance, Lotus continues to push the boundaries of automotive engineering with their latest models, keeping South Norfolk at the cutting edge of global motorsport and design. I recently had the privilege, perhaps a thrill, of being let loose on the Hethel test track with a stunning new Lotus Emira. Now, that was my best Jeremy Clarkson impression, by the way. Now, I won't be entering the British Grand Prix anytime soon, I can promise you that, Madam Deputy Speaker. I know. I'm pleased to report that both the car and myself, as a newly elected Member of Parliament, left the site entirely intact, much to the relief of the Lotus team and probably to local Labour organisers worried about another by-election. The work done by Lotus is not just about fast cars, but about pioneering technology that has implications far beyond the racetrack. From lightweight materials to advanced aerodynamics, Lotus continues to be a leader in innovation that drives not only motorsport, but the broader automotive industry. One of the greatest privileges of representing South Norfolk is the opportunity to champion incredible businesses, community groups, and people that make it, in my humble opinion, the best place to live in the country. Let me start with Huggers in Long Stratton, a plant-based coffee shop. Yes, you heard me right, they do sell lovely food, that has taken the town by storm. Their Millionaire's shortbread cake is the best and simply to die for. Then there's Urban Jungle in Cossey, a haven for those with a love for the weird and wonderful in houseplants and tropical plants. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, after all that plant shopping, you have to check out their fabulous coffee shop. You may notice there's a theme with some of these shops that I'm sort of highlighting here. In Loddon, we have Rosie Lee's Tea Room, a real gem. It's stepping into a tea room run by your gran, basically, full of warmth, character, and the best tea and cakes around. But more than that, it was a hub for the community, a place that cared deeply for those in need during COVID-19 lockdown, ensuring that no one was left behind in those difficult times. It truly embodies the best of us. I also want to give a special mention to the Wyndham Community Outreach Project, which is run by Arnie and an incredible team of volunteers. They work tirelessly to ensure that those struggling to get by have access to food, clothing, and perhaps more importantly, friendship. Their fantastic book bank ensures that everyone has access to a good book because they understand that nourishing the mind is just as important as nourishing the body. And last but no means least, there's Spurgeon's in Brook. Now, if you haven't tried their sausage rolls yet, well, I tell you, you're missing out because they are something truly extraordinary. The butcher there is second to none, and their local produce is some of the best you'll find any in Norfolk. It's businesses like these and people behind them that make South Norfolk such a vibrant, welcoming and thriving place to live. Each of them contribute to the fabric of our community, providing not just the goods and services, but the places of connection and support that bring us together as neighbour and friends. My values were forged in the heart of East Anglia, shaped by the lessons learned by my parents. My mum, Sarah, a hard-working shop worker, and my dad, Wayne, a stable lad. Yes, those jobs still exist in the 21st century. Instilled in me principles that have guided my life, which I hope to bring to this house. They taught me the importance of honesty, of giving your all no matter what the task, and never losing sight of your aspirations. But perhaps most importantly, they taught me to treat people with respect, whether a colleague, a constituent, or someone you've just met. These are the values that shape me, and I pledge to uphold them and serve the people of South Norfolk with them. As I take my seat in this House, I do so with a clear sense of responsibility and deep commitment to the people of the constituency. There are two areas that I'm particularly passionate about, and which will be at the forefront of my work in Parliament. Standing up for families of children with special educational needs and disabilities, and seeking much-needed improvements to our justice system. Firstly, supporting SEND families is a cause close to my heart. Far too often, families face unnecessary battles to secure the right support for their children. The system, which should be there to help, can sometimes feel like an obstacle put in their place, leaving parents exhausted and children without the resources they need to thrive. I work tirelessly to push for reforms in SEND provisions so they are fair, timely and accessible. Every child deserves the opportunity to reach their full potential, and every family deserves to be heard, supported and empowered. Secondly, I'm deeply committed to the reforms of our justice system. While we can be proud of many aspects of British justice, there are still serious issues that need addressing. Victims of crime too often feel let down by delays and an overburdened system, and communities are frustrated by the lack of swift and fair outcomes. I'll work to ensure that our justice system prioritises victims' rights, tackles delays and restores public confidence. We must also ensure that rehabilitation and reformation are at the core of our system, so that those who have served their time have real opportunities to contribute to society once more. These are the challenges I intend to take with me on this journey through Parliament, and I look forward to working with colleagues across the House to making them a reality. Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe South Norfolk has a bright future, and I'm eager to work with colleagues in government to ensure that we address the pressing issues of our time, from housing and infrastructure to education and obviously healthcare. The people of South Norfolk deserve no less than our full commitment, and I pledge to give them just that.
As the front bench contributions went on for so long, backbenchers will now be limited to 3 minutes. If I can ask maiden speeches to edit down to 5, I'll try and squeeze in as many people as I can. A tireless Dr. Luke Evans.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm going to remove my neck collar, which I am allowed to do, but if any of you see my head wobbling, please intervene and I'll put it straight back on. And may I congratulate the new member to his place, and the respect that he talks about and commands, I'm sure he'll be an asset to this House. Now, I come with a slightly unique perspective to this debate, and 3 minutes is very short to try and make that point, but I've been a doctor since 2007. I sat on the Health Select Committee for 3 years, and most recently, and probably most obviously, have recently had spinal surgery on my neck, but that's not my only foray into the NHS. I've had both knees operated on, my shoulder operated on, had my appendix out and ended up on intensive care with bilateral pneumonia after that. So I've seen a fair way of looking around it. Absolutely. But one of the things that, when it comes to this debate, is the political football and the political nature around health. And it always strikes me that there is a rising tide across the Western world, and indeed these 4 points of the nation. If we think in Scotland it's run by the NHS is run by the SNP, in Wales it's run by Labour, in Northern Ireland it's also separate, and we had the Conservatives now handed over to Labour. All of them are struggling, and we should do well to remember that. Now, I actually came into politics not to change the world, but to solve it. It sounds cheesy, and in these last 2 minutes I've got a set of suggestions, and as any good doctor would do, look at the short term, the mid-term and the long term to try and help improve this. Now, we could start this by doing a root and branch review into prescribing. It's one of the most wasteful things you will ever see in the NHS. On top of that, there's worth looking at the European Working Time Directive that hampers doctors when they're studying. Overnight, that could increase by a couple of percentage points the ability to see more patients. Communications, as someone who spent 9 months waiting for this operation, the number of letters, appointments are caught up. I have the ability to understand that and work my way through it. But a root and branch review in communications, the simple bread and butter of the NHS, would be very welcome. And comparable data across the nations, being able to see what goes on, is so important. For the medium term, I'd like to see statementing when people go into the NHS. Everyone knows how much it costs when they go to America, and it's £40,000 having your ski accident. It costs that much here. People would do well to remember that when they don't turn up to their appointments. The IT system, we focus a lot on patients, but I'd like to see more done to focus on the staff and how they can use IT. And in terms of GPs, I'd like to see capping of list sizes. This is a sensible way now. We have a workforce plan in place to be able to allow us to grow our staffing with it. But finally, when it comes to long term, and in my 20 seconds, I'll suggest having a national service for SEND, taking education and health together to deal with mental health. 40% of the CAMHS referrals in Leicestershire are dealt with autism and ADHD. And for me, that is a real problem that could easily be solved. And with my final 5 seconds, an NHS centre for clinical excellence to share best practice. It's not good enough.
Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Hinckley and Bosworth. This was a tour de force from Lord Darzi, and I want to thank him for the work that he's done. And to the Secretary of State has rightly commissioned this report as a benchmark for future improvement. And I was a member of the Health Select Committee from 2010 to 2015, and given the evidence we heard at the committee, there was no alternative but to pause the bill, and the committee played an important role in that. Chapter 10 of the report sets out the structure, and Lord Darzi points out that this bill, the 2012 Act, was 3 times the size of the original Act setting up the NHS. But as the 2022 Act moved into integrated care, paragraph 15, page 121, he throws some concerns about how the ICB's integrated care boards operate, and for us, the accountability. So could I ask the Secretary of State if there could be a review into how these operate? Paragraph 37 highlights that the Chief Executive's pay of a trust is based on the turnover of the organisation, which encourages trusts to grow their revenue rather than to improve operation performance. Some are even paid more than the Prime Minister. Flow of patients is important, and that's where working with authorities, local authorities, is so important. We can move planes around the world, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it seems we can't move people out of hospitals. The Select Committee visited Torbay, which was set up in 2009. We followed Mrs Smith from a single point of contact all the way through. And as Lord Darzi says at page 77, collaboration is not the same as integration. He points out at page 5, paragraph 13, that too great a share of the money is spent in hospitals rather than the community. And at page 81, GP contracts are complex, and doing the right thing for patients is the wrong thing for GP income. That cannot be right. Our mantra should be prevention, prevention, prevention. We, in our report, moved public health into local authorities, but as Lord Darzi said, health visitors are dropping, and he also says the NHS is missing an opportunity to intervene early. We had sure starts, that's where the health visitors were focused. He talked about clinical negligence. £2.9 billion of the budget is spent on settling claims, and I would ask the Secretary of State, that's 1.7% of the budget, ask the Secretary of State if he can pursue the duty of candour, and maybe ask each trust to look at whether they can move the cases into arbitration. Sadly, disparities by ethnicity make very grim and sad reading. Paragraph 24 refers to the median age at death as 62 for white people, 40 for black people, 33 for Asian people, and 30 for mixed. I'd ask the Secretary, there was a chart that was supposed to be in the report, that's not there. Could the Secretary of State look at producing that? Lord Darzi's report gives the Secretary of State and the health team an important opportunity to reset the NHS. This is it's the envy of the world, and it's free at the point of use. As Lord Darzi said, we cannot afford not to have an NHS.
Maiden speech, Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a true privilege to stand here today among these green benches as the member for Esher and Walton. And not only that, but for the very first Liberal MP for my constituency for over 100 years, and its very first female MP. The biggest issue on the doorstep in my constituency is undoubtedly the state of the NHS, and so I am pleased to make my maiden speech in this debate. First, however, it would be remiss of me not to point out that Esher and Walton are only two of the towns I represent. My constituency also includes the Dittons, the Molesys, Claygate, Hersham, Hinchley Wood and Oatlands. I am proud to call this my home for almost 20 years and where I raised my 4 children. It is also the playground of the kings and queens of England. Esher and Walton spans the former hunting estate of Henry VIII, which stretched from Thames Ditton to Oatlands Palace, where his daughters Mary and Elizabeth sometimes resided and Charles I was imprisoned. As a result of Henry's Forest, our constituency is almost 60% greenbelt land, and in the government's planning reforms to provide the homes we desperately need, these areas must also be protected. It was the ease of travel to London via the River Thames when boats were faster than horses, which led the monarchs to Esher and Walton, and sometimes our trains into London feel as slow as being on horseback, and I look forward to pushing for improvements to our railways. But we are a river community. The Thames provides our border with London, and the chalk stream, the Mole, runs through our constituency and is now one of the most polluted rivers in England. My constituents are so exercised by the sewage pouring into our rivers that they have been explicit about sending me to this place to help sort it out. Our rowing clubs share their disquiet, not least because they don't want their Olympians getting sick. Molesey Boat Club sent 4 members to Paris this year, as did Surbiton Hockey Club, which is actually in Long Ditton, which sent 11 and has over 1,000 youth players. Every weekend in Esher and Walton, grassroots youth football clubs gear up to welcome over 5,000 players registered. The Great Walton and Hersham FC boast the youngest owners in world football, and so interlinked is football into our community that the 5 Claygate Royals youth teams are named after Claygate's 5 pubs. We are a hub of children playing sport, which matters for their health and well-being, which brings me back to this debate. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to tell you a story from my constituency. During the general election campaign, on the doorstep, I met a couple unloading their car. I apologised for disturbing them as they were unpacking their shopping. Not shopping, they replied. We are unpacking our son's belongings. He died. They went on to tell me that this young 19-year-old man had taken his life while at university. He met you, they told me. He said he would vote for you because you were speaking out on mental health and special educational needs, support for young people. His mother told me that she counted herself lucky that she had managed to support her son for the years at school because she could afford interventions and therapy. She worried about those children stuck on NHS waiting lists, unable to access the support that he had. In Surrey, there are almost 7,000 children on mental health waiting lists, with average waits of almost 8 months. I meet parents on the doorstep whose special needs children are at home rather than school for months, sometimes years, sliding into depression because they cannot access adequate provision. I promised this young man's mother that if I were elected, I would continue to shine a light on this issue, and I can think of no better place to do it than in this debate. Yeah. Our children and young people are in trouble, and we must fix it. As a start, we need to put mental health care on an equitable footing with physical health. In 2024, this is long overdue. Let this new Parliament be the start of it. Lastly, I am of course very aware that I stand here on the anniversary of the 7th of October attacks. I want to add my voice, remembering all those who have lost their lives, are still held hostage, and those across the region who are displaced, suffering, and have been killed. As the new Liberal Democrat spokesperson on international development, I urge the government to use all its levers to get humanitarian aid into the region as winter approaches. I will be pushing this House to renew our leadership in international development by restoring the 0.7% of gross national income to UK aid. Yeah. My constituents are outward looking. They are used to having a foreign secretary as an MP in my predecessor Dominic Raab, and I pay tribute to his work, particularly in his introduction of the B&O scheme, which my party had long called for and has given my constituency a wonderful new British Hong Kong community. And following 15 years of working overseas, I'm committed to contributing to resetting our standing in the world, recognising our international obligations, participating fully in our international relation institutions, and including restoring a closer relationship with our closest neighbours, Europe. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I bring to this House the brilliance of Esher and Walton and their struggles. As someone once said, politics done well changes lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, it saves lives too. In this still new Parliament, I intend, with honourable members and friends, to set to work.
Maiden speech, Terry Jermy.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm delighted to follow the member for Esher and Walton and South Norfolk. Physically close here in the chamber, geographically close back home in Norfolk. And I am delighted to be able to deliver my maiden speech as the new Member of Parliament for South West Norfolk. I have the pleasure of representing this fantastic part of the country, the place where I was born, where I went to school and college, bought my first house and started my business. Up until a few years ago, even keen political observers could have been forgiven for not quite knowing exactly where South West Norfolk was. But I can certainly pay tribute to my predecessor, the Right Honourable Liz Truss, for firmly putting us on the map. Our largest market town is Thetford. It's where I am from and where I had the honour of serving as mayor. Some members may be familiar with the popular Dad's Army series, which was largely filmed in Thetford. We are the original Warmington-on-Sea. If you ever get a chance, the Dad's Army Museum is well worth a visit, and no trip to Thetford is complete unless you have a photo next to our life-size Captain Mannering statue. Now, there are a number of Dad's Army quotes that I am sure will be relevant to my role in this place. I have already said to myself many times, don't panic, don't panic. But I sincerely hope, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I do not give you cause to refer to myself as you stupid boy. Now, South West Norfolk is beautiful. We have wide open fields, forests and rivers and fantastic history. But like so many rural areas, under the surface, there are challenges. I am acutely aware that 1/3 of all children in South West Norfolk live in poverty, and there are parts that are in the top 10% for indices of multiple deprivation. Health inequalities persist. With Norfolk regarded as a dentistry desert, there is a crisis in adult social care, with far too many examples of poor quality care provided. We have a mental health trust with long-standing challenges and placed in special measures, and the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in King's Lynn riddled with rack, literally held up by more than 5,000 metal and wooden props. The challenges are stark, and these are some of the many issues that I have and will continue to press the government on. Now, I think it's fair to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I wasn't expecting to win my election. And as a result, there are many people wondering, who is this person from South West Norfolk? I do not come from a political family, but I care passionately about my local community, which is why I decided to put myself forward and join the local town council aged 22. I've taken advice and guidance from many fellow councillors over the years, but one lady in particular, Thelma Paynes, mentored and guided me, and I owe much of my political upbringing to her. Thelma sadly passed away in 2022 and has therefore not seen me reach this place, but I certainly wouldn't be here without her encouragement and support. When she stood down as a local councillor, she would still telephone regularly with the customary, "Listen up, duck, I've got something to say." And whilst mentioning role models, I must take a moment to mention Baroness Gillian Shepherd, our Member of Parliament from 1987 through to 2005. If there is one local MP that I would like to emulate, it would be her. A fantastic example of a good constituency MP, knowledgeable of the area, rooted in the community. Being a Labour councillor in rural Norfolk can be tough. Fortunately for myself, I had family on my side. Yes, of course, with support and encouragement, but I had an advantage over my rivals. My dad was the youngest of 13. My mum had 7 brothers. With nearly 40 aunties and uncles and over 100 cousins, I am sure I owe at least my first election victory to my grandparents' love for one another and the resulting vote some years later. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is because of my experiences with my own family, and more specifically with my father, that I made the decision to switch from a local government candidate to standing for the first time in a national election. And it is entirely appropriate, but also somewhat difficult for me, that I find myself here today, delivering my maiden speech in a debate about our NHS. In 2013, my dad, Trevor Jermy, had a life-altering stroke aged just 55. He was an engineer. He worked hard from the day he left school at 15, and he became an accomplished welder fabricator. Frankly, there was not much that my dad could not fix. Now, strokes come in all shapes and sizes, but having shown no warning signs, my dad suffered a major stroke. The physical aspects were painfully easy to see, and difficult for a man so used to using his hands. But there was psychological damage too. And as a family, we saw up close and over a number of years the awfulness of the current process applying for personal independence payments, dehumanising work capability assessments, and how little we as a country value the contribution of carers. Disabled people and their families continue to come under repeated attack, most recently in Norfolk with changes to the minimum income guarantee. After 10 further years with my dad, he became unwell, and we tried to get him a GP appointment, which, like for so many, was difficult. When we eventually managed to get him in front of a doctor, he was sent straight to A&E with pneumonia. Then he contracted COVID. The pneumonia combined with COVID was too much for his already fragile state, and he was placed in a medically induced coma. And as a family, we spent every day for the following 2 months visiting my dad in intensive care at West Suffolk Hospital. Because of the infection risk, he was in a quarantine room. We were only allowed in one a day for a maximum of an hour in full PPE. His 65th birthday passed, as did Christmas and New Year. When the time came to try and wake him, we were devastated to discover he'd had a further stroke whilst in the coma. Some more weeks passed, but my dad never regained the cognitive and physical abilities that he had just a few months earlier, and he passed away on the 29th of January 2023, aged just 65. During that long time that my dad spent in hospital, I saw painfully up close so much of our NHS. I saw ambulances routinely queuing up, the accident and emergency department always busy, the hospital buildings looking old and tired. I saw how few staff were available during the week, and at weekends the situation was worse. I saw how his catheter bag was left for longer than it should have been, and of course I saw the impact of this whole nightmare on my mother and the rest of our family. It was at that point that I decided enough was enough, and if I could, I should try to do something about it, and that's when I decided to stand. Not particularly because I wanted to win, but I wanted to raise the issues. I wanted someone to acknowledge how bad things had become, how we couldn't carry on like this. I've been struck by the majesty of this place since I've been elected. It's utterly awe-inspiring, and I don't think I'll ever quite get used to it. For all the pomp and the politics, this role carries with it a huge burden and a huge opportunity. We cannot fail to succeed. We must do better. We must at all times remember why we are here, because people in this country, particularly the most vulnerable, are absolutely relying on us to succeed, and I hope to do what I can to make their lives that little bit better.
Dr. Neil Shastri-Hurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by congratulating the Honourable Member for Esher and Walton on her deeply affectionate speech. It's a place that is close to my heart, with my grandparents residing in Claygate for a number of years, but also to the Honourable Member for South West Norfolk, and may I just say I'm sure his father would be hugely proud of how he spoke with great affection for his home constituency. Madam Deputy Speaker, on the 5th of July of this year, 76 years to the day that the NHS came into being, my mother was involved in a serious road traffic accident. But for the skill and care of the health service, she may well not have survived. Many of those who cared for her were my former colleagues in the major trauma service at University Hospitals Birmingham. I know that the care that they provided was not an exception, not a case of going a little further for a former colleague. No, Madam Deputy Speaker, this was yet another example of the brilliant and dedicated care our healthcare professionals provide every day. Whilst we quite rightly acknowledge and praise the endeavours of all our healthcare workers, we must not put the NHS on such a pedestal that it becomes a sacred cow. Whilst we can all appreciate the hard work and dedication of our NHS staff, it would be unwise and a mistake, I say, to construe those same workers and the institution as one and the same thing. There is a real risk that there becomes such a religious fervour around the institution of the NHS, its growth and development is stifled. We've reached a point whereby any constructive criticism of the organisation itself is deemed to be levelling the same criticism as the staff who keep the wheels grinding through every shift. The NHS was, of course, built to provide episodic acute care. Now it is heavily dominated by the management and treatment of chronic conditions. The hospital-centric model that presently exists is arguably outdated, and a paradigm shift to a more preventative, community-based model should be pursued. For far too long, it has been the workforce that has risen up to the challenge rather than the organisational structure itself. The principle that our health service should care for everyone, regardless of their personal wealth, is profoundly important. To undermine that would be to disrupt the foundations upon which it is built. However, we would be doing the NHS a disservice if we failed to have an honest debate about how we improve it. In the short time I have remaining, I wish to raise the issue of over-centralisation of decision-making. We've ended up in a position whereby clinicians and managers on the front line are less empowered and trusted to make decisions and deliver for their patients. Too many decisions are made at the centre, which leads to overly complicated and often conflicting layers of approval and process. Ultimately, by enabling risk to be held by others parts of the system, local decision makers will be more empowered, decisions will be made in a more timely manner, and a greater sense of trust will be established.
Dame Siobhain McDonagh. Madam Deputy Speaker, members from across the House will have their own experience of the NHS. But in my case, caring for my late sister Margaret, who was diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumour in 2021, I can say, with regret, the NHS failed her, forcing us to travel to Germany at her sickest to find some treatment that might extend her life. In his summary letter published before the report, Lord Darzi told us that he was shocked by what he found. But the 3,200 people who are diagnosed with a glioblastoma brain tumour every year are not shocked. They will know just how bad things are. The report told us that the UK has the highest cancer death rate than our European neighbours. For patients with a glioblastoma brain tumour, that is news to no one. In comparison to 33 similar countries, the UK ranks 25th for 5-year survival rates. Life expectancy for somebody diagnosed with a glioblastoma is just 9 months. There hasn't been a new treatment in the NHS for over 30 years, and the diagnosis is still a death sentence. In 2018, after Tessa Giles sadly passed away from a glioblastoma, £40 million of ring-fenced government funding was promised for research into brain tumours. Of that 40 million, just 11.3 million has been spent. 6 years on, and the National Institute for Health and Care Research cannot even get the money out the door. That is a real failure of government. In June 2024, just before the election, a round table was held to discuss how to spend £15 million of this money. And I have been trying to find out what that round table decided. And last week I received a letter from Professor Lucy Chappell, Chief Scientific Advisor. She tells me, disturbingly, that the NIHR largely funds research on the basis of the importance of the topic to patients and health and care services, value for money and scientific quality, rather than by allocating funds for specific disease areas. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't do work on glioblastoma. If the NHS also doesn't do it, who does? Do we keep on baking the cakes?
Thank you very much. Gregory Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As someone who's worked in healthcare for most of my career, and as I said in my maiden speech in this House, I really think we do need an honest discussion with the public about how we fund, provide and deliver healthcare in England. And after 7 years working in the NHS myself prior to being elected, working every day to improve clinical outcomes and improve patient care, including on the surgical hubs my right honourable friend, the Shadow Secretary of State, mentioned, I can assure you that the NHS has significant challenges, but so too are its opportunities, and the opportunities for us to reshape it, not only to meet the needs of today, but ensure its survival for future generations. It's clear from Lord Darzi's report that, and many others indeed, that the NHS, whilst not broken, is at a tipping point. Whilst his report is wide-ranging, it didn't and couldn't cover everything. As an example, postnatal female care wasn't given much time, and it's essential to ensuring mothers and children have a universal standard of post-birth care. But despite significant investment by the last government, we must be honest with the public, not just about the true state of the health service, both national and local, but also about the difficult choices that lie ahead. First, we need to rethink about how we deliver healthcare, closer to home, more efficiently. Expanding partnerships with the private sector, whether in diagnostics, elective surgeries or mental health services, can relieve some burden on NHS facilities. By fostering public-private partnerships, we can enhance capacity and efficiency whilst ensuring the NHS remains free at the point of use. Technology and innovation are essential to transforming this. AI, digital records, telemedicine all offer enormous potential to improve outcomes and reduce costs, but the NHS is lagging behind in digital transformation. The catastrophe of Labour's NHS IT system casts a long shadow. And equally, we must have that honest conversation about patient choice and responsibility. The NHS has historically promised to be everything to everyone, but we must ask ourselves if this is realistic. Encouraging patient choice could drive competition and improve service delivery, but we also need to ask patients to take greater responsibility for managing their health, particularly in areas like preventative care and chronic disease management. My final point, and the key to this debate, is funding. For too long, we've relied on promises of increased funding without fully grappling with how we can sustainably finance the NHS. More money is part of the solution, but where should that money come from? I want an NHS free at the point of use, but we need to explore social insurance models, encourage private investment, or potentially increase taxes. These are tough questions, but they must be answered. We need a radical rethink of NHS bureaucracy, and in conclusion, whilst the NHS is one of the major achievements of our time, now is the time to take action and reform it.
Speech, Alex McIntyre.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I congratulate the members for South Norfolk, South West Norfolk and Esher and Walton on their wonderful maiden speeches. I wish to first pay tribute to my predecessor, Richard Graham. Richard represented Gloucester and its residents for 14 years, and I thank him for his service. I know that in the last Parliament he worked to make spiking a specific criminal offence, something which I am proud that this government will deliver. It's the most incredible privilege to stand here on behalf of Gloucester residents and to make my maiden speech in this debate, and I think it is particularly appropriate for 3 reasons. Firstly, my local NHS hospital, Gloucestershire Royal, has played an important part in my family's life. It was where my wife and I spent our first night with our little boy, who turns 1 later this month. I've also spent much of my professional career representing NHS trusts up and down the country, and I've heard firsthand some of the challenges they face, particularly in relation to recruitment and retention of frontline key workers, to whom I'm sure we all owe a personal debt of gratitude. It is also appropriate because I know how many families in my constituency are struggling to get the NHS care that they need, and will recognise many of the findings in Lord Darzi's report. Seeing a GP, going to the dentist for a checkup, arriving at A&E in an ambulance and going straight through those doors, those might seem like the basic requirements of a functioning health service, but for my constituents, they have become a luxury. Madam Deputy Speaker, Gloucester is a city rich with potential. We're a city small in size, but giant in stature. We have a proud history stretching back to the Roman colonia of Glevum, one of the administrative capitals of Roman Britain. We're one of only 3 cities in the UK to have hosted a coronation, and our mighty cathedral soars above the city's skyline. Now, younger members of the House will recognise the cathedral's cloisters as part of the magical world of Hogwarts. Older members perhaps may recognise our city and our tailor as part of the magical world of another famous Potter, Beatrix. Last month we celebrated Gloucester Day, which marks the end of the siege of Gloucester, when our city stood tall when all hope appeared lost, and you can still find brilliant examples of our wonderful heritage across the city, perhaps with a visit to the folk of Gloucester or a tour with the Gloucester Civic Trust. And we have a proud military history too, from the glorious Gloucesters to RAF Quedgley, which is now Kingsway. And our historic docks, recently designated a heritage harbour by the Maritime Heritage Trust, is home to the brilliant Soldiers of Gloucestershire Museum. Gloucester also stands out as a place of great innovations. The vacuum cleaner, the Ferris wheel, the first jet aircraft, and of course, Viennetta. All pioneered in our great city. But our potential, our ability to be great, does not need to be confined to the history books. And no, I'm not just talking about the country's finest rugby team, Gloucester Hartbury, who have won the Premiership Women's Rugby title 2 years in a row. No, the early seeds of change have been sown in recent years, starting under Parmjit Danda, the Labour predecessor, and Richard, with the regeneration of the Quays, the Forum and the exciting new university campus, which is due to open next year. But we can and we must go further. Plans for the redevelopment of Podsmead and Matson must be brought to life, where brownfield sites across the city turned into the social housing of the future. This government's mission to get Britain building can and should unlock our city's potential. But it is not in development where our city's greatest potential lies. That potential is of course, in our people. The brilliant people of Gloucester, community-minded, fiercely proud, and quite happy to tell me exactly what they are thinking. But as the new MP for Gloucester, I know that while potential is found in all residents in our city, opportunity is not. I entered politics because I see the potential of every child in Gloucester, and I want to fight for opportunities like the ones I had growing up in a working class family under the last Labour government for every single family like mine in our city. Because when I visit in my schools in my constituency, I see the next generation of solar and wind engineers, the next cohort of developers and cybersecurity experts, the carers, nurses and doctors who will look after me when I am old. Madam Deputy Speaker, Gloucester is a diverse city, with over 70 different languages spoken on Barton Street alone. A city which stood united during the uprising of racism and Islamophobia we saw elsewhere in the country this summer. But more needs to be done. At a recent meeting of the Gloucestershire Race Collective, I promised to use my position in this House to give voice to the concerns of our diverse communities in Gloucester and work with this government to tackle rising levels of racism and Islamophobia in our country. And as I work with this government to deliver on its mission to provide opportunities for everyone in my constituency, regardless of their background, I hope that those opportunities will strengthen the already incredible bonds that bring our city together. Bonds which are best demonstrated by some of the incredible community organisations and charities working in our city. Like Gloucestershire Gateway Trust, whose Bridging the Gap programme helps break down the barriers to work and gets local people into sustainable employment. Like Gloucester Feed the Hungry, whose warm welcome, hot coffee and delicious samosas put a smile on the faces of so many in our city. Like the Holly Gazzard Trust, tackling domestic abuse and stalking, turning the family's own personal tragedy into a safer future for all. There are many more, Madam Deputy Speaker. I could go on all day, but I'm conscious of the time. But these organisations demonstrate the very best of our city, a community that is driven to help others to achieve their potential. So in closing, I make this simple promise to constituents of Gloucester, the community that I am so proud to serve. I will work tirelessly to deliver a better future for our city, a future where everyone can access the NHS care that they need, a future where every child has the opportunity to thrive, a future that celebrates our heritage, our potential, our diversity, our community, our Gloucester. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Maiden speech, Ian Solemn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and congratulations to the member for Gloucester on an excellent maiden speech. You packed in an awful lot in. You're just over 5 minutes and have set the bar very high for me. I'm aware I will be being watched by the Deputy Speaker. It's an immense honour and hugely humbling to address this House for the first time as the first ever MP for the new constituency of St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire. A new constituency that, for me, so perfectly encompasses the heart of Cambridgeshire. a countryside that includes some of the most fertile farmland in the UK, and the rich ecology at the edge of the fens, mixing ancient villages and rural communities with new towns and new communities, and of course the magnificent market town of St Neots itself, the largest town in Cambridgeshire. It's a source of great pride that our town has, for the first time, had the recognition here of a constituency bearing its name. And having been entrusted to make that newfound recognition count, I'm sure the House will appreciate hearing a great deal more about St Neots from me over the coming years. St Neots gained its name as a site of pilgrimage, and sitting alongside the Great North Road, we've welcomed visitors throughout the centuries. But in recent times, across the whole of the constituency, we've had a proud record of welcoming those who've chosen to make it their home, particularly from the London overspill in St Neots and the new village of Bar Hill in the 1960s, to the more recent major developments at the eastern edge of St Neots and the northern edge of Cambridge, the new town of Camborne, which this year celebrates its 25th birthday, and the even newer town of Northstowe, which will become the largest new town in the UK since Milton Keynes. It's really exciting to see new residents shaping vibrant new communities, creating new traditions and supporting each other. But Madam Deputy Speaker, in a very literal sense, these new communities are why I am here, representing a new constituency, and why I also pay tribute to not one predecessor, but to three. Jonathan Ginogly, Lucy Fraser and Anthony Brown all served with dedication and commitment to the communities they represented in my constituency, and also to our national interest as, at various times, members of the government. But my being here also starkly highlights some of the incongruities of growth in Cambridgeshire. In creating my constituency, taking the number of members representing Cambridgeshire and Peterborough from 7 to 8, Parliament has deployed more democratic resources to Cambridgeshire. But many other resources remain unchanged or lag far behind where they ought to be. Whether it's funding for the police, the fire and rescue services, education, social or council services, or most pertinently to this debate, health services. Lord Darzi's report pulls no punches in articulating the dire state of the National Health Service. But in St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire, these problems are exacerbated by a funding model that has taken little account of the growth in our population, felt most acutely in primary care services, with GPs and dentist access really challenging. So I do urge the Secretary of State to put this right at the earliest opportunity. And moreover, follow Lord Darzi's recommendations that by piloting those new, innovative, multidisciplinary models of neighbourhood care in the NHS in our new communities in St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire. Such innovation is something my constituency would surely welcome, and as a scientist by training, it's something that I would welcome too. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have focused this speech on my constituency and my constituents because it's my greatest source of pride to represent them here. But my background in physics, with a PhD in cosmology, is something that I am also proud to be able to bring to this role, even if I did think that I left the study of black holes behind me. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am, of course, already the longest-serving member for St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire. But I hope that the dedication, integrity and judgment that I have pledged to serve my constituents with will see me hold that record for some considerable time to come, making a real difference to the people of my constituency and working with members across this House to make a difference to the whole of the UK. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a real pleasure to follow the new member for St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire. I'm sure he's going to be a rising star on his own benches, but it's also been such a pleasure to follow all honourable members in making their maiden speeches today. And I'm really grateful for the analysis that Lord Darzi has set out for us. The NHS has never been under such duress, nor has its staff. But following a diagnosis, we need a prescription, and that's what I want to talk to today, because we live in an ageing society, and whilst we can celebrate the real medical advances that we have today, which just weren't there when Labour were last in power, the diagnostics, the treatments, the digital and technology are now available, we also know the urgency with which we need to apply them, and that means transformation has got to be centre of the agenda. And I really do congratulate the focus which my honourable friend, right honourable friend, is putting on the NHS in bringing that transformation which is needed. But before we can even look at that, we need to look at the financial flows in the NHS, because they're not working, and the governance structures as well. And I'm not talking reorganisation here. I'm talking about having the one controlling mind, overseeing the system in such a way it is in the right place in the service. At the moment, there is too much focus on secondary care, and as a result of that, it is sucking the resources and it is sucking the work into that part and driving the inefficiency. And that's why moving services into primary care is the key to unlocking the productivity, but also the savings which are needed. But it will improve health as well. And in the short time I've got, I want to just point to two examples in my own community. First of all, in mental health, 30 Clarence Street is set up to be open access, no longer those long waiting queues to go and see mental health practitioners, multidisciplinary, the public sector and the voluntary sector working hand in hand, ensuring they're meeting people's needs. And I invite the Secretary of State to come and see that service, because this is what we should be doing across our NHS. 2 more hubs to be set up in my constituency, really driving the way around mental health. And then the work of Nimbus Care in primary care settings, pulling out from the NHS all those services which just don't need to be there in the secondary part of the service into primary care, unplugging the backlog in the front door of the health service, but also making sure that we're looking after people at the back door. This is the transformation our health service truly needs, and therefore I'd like to share those examples and how they can be extended to really build the NHS for the future.
In speech, Susan Murray.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to make my maiden speech. It's a pleasure to be speaking after so many excellent maiden speeches from South Norfolk, from South West Norfolk, obviously Esher and Walton, and Gloucester, and St Neots and Cambridge. So that takes up a bit of time, but I think it's important that these excellent speeches are acknowledged, and I enjoyed listening to them all. It's a great privilege for me to stand here today representing Mid-Dumbartonshire and the communities that are close to my heart. I've lived there for 30 years, and it's where both my sons went to school. Mid-Dumbartonshire is in Scotland, in case you hadn't noticed. And it's a new constituency following boundary changes this year. It sits 100% inside the East Dumbartonshire Council area, as did the old constituency of East Dumbartonshire, but it now includes Lennoxtown and Milton of Campsie to the north and some of Lenzie to the east. And I'm delighted these towns are now in the constituency I represent, but my sorrow is that it doesn't include Kirkintilloch East and Twecher, which are also dear to my heart and where I've been a councillor since 2017. But I'm sure the member opposite for Cumbernauld and Kirkintilloch will look after the community there, and it was good to hear her highlighting the problems there are with local bus services in her maiden speech. Of course, it goes without saying that Mid-Dumbartonshire is actually the best constituency in the UK. Local towns are regularly promoted as the best place to live in the UK, Bearsden in 2021 and Kirkintilloch in 2024. And in 2017, Women's Hour revealed East Dumbartonshire as the best place in Britain for women to live. Incidentally, that was when Jo Swinson began her third term as the Liberal Democrat MP for East Dunbartonshire. So I want to thank Jo for all her work in the constituency. I also want to recognise her successor, Amy Callaghan. I particularly want to recognise the personal challenges that Amy overcame during her time as an MP. She has shown such courage in her service to the community, and I wish her well in the future. And I also want to thank Councillor Stuart MacDonald, who was the MP for the newer part of the constituency. I know that he is held in very high regard in that area and with much affection. So I'm pleased to be speaking in the debate on Lord Darzi's report, because I know only too well the challenges that individuals and families have to face when our health lets us down. My husband had a brain hemorrhage in 2006, which changed our lives in an instant. I became his full-time carer, and I couldn't continue in my profession, and he was never able to return to his career. From being comfortably off, life changed to watching every penny. Without the support of our family, we could have lost our home, and we were very fortunate. Friends in our community helped me to survive and get on with life. I can't praise NHS Greater Glasgow and Clyde enough. My husband spent months getting well enough to come home from hospital. Perhaps we were actually lucky by the timing, because the excellent and talented and caring staff had the resources at that time that I have seen declining ever since. I worked in the NHS before a career in medical marketing, and I know the NHS from working in it, from working with it, and from my experience visiting my husband. And latterly, I have been aware of the integration of health and social care through my role in the council. So I know the pressures that professionals are under, good, kind, caring professionals, to become as efficient as possible, and they are absolutely doing their best to do that. Looking back, this was the beginning of me becoming involved in politics. I was thrown into the space which our society refers to as community. I know why it's important for government to fund local authorities and communities and give them real power. They prevent costs to the NHS every day by stopping the revolving door of treatment, discharge home, relapsing back into treatment. They support self-care and well-being. They are our CPS, and not the Crown Prosecution Service, but our Community Prevention Service, which pays back investment in spades by preventing costs. What makes Mid-Dunbartonshire special is its people and communities. During COVID, like in other places, the community stepped up to support each other, and these groups are still helping with shopping and patient transport. There are groups of volunteers fighting climate change, reducing social isolation, providing mental health support, peer support, supporting carers, providing financial advice, helping with housing problems, looking after community buildings, preserving our heritage, knitting for peace, promoting fair trade, performance art, and more. Tackling problems at home and internationally, Mid-Dunbartonshire people care and take action. And from listening to other maiden speakers, I know that this is happening all over the UK. And Liberal Democrats want to harness that power for good. One message that came across loud and clear for me, and forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, but I think that the experience I had of people speaking to me on the doorsteps in Mid-Dunbartonshire is that they're tired of voting against things. They want to be able to vote positively for things. And in Mid-Dunbartonshire, we have Thomas Muir of Hunters Hill from Bishop Briggs, who was a famous son. And he lived at the end of the 18th century, and he was a strenuous advocate of equal representation of the people in the House of the People, where I stand today. In his words, I have devoted myself to the cause of the people. It's a good cause, and it shall ultimately prevail. It shall finally triumph. The fight for fair votes prompted revolution at the end of the 18th century, and Thomas Muir was found guilty of sedition and transported to Australia for his efforts. In the 19th century, it took 3 Reform Acts of this House to slowly extend voting rights for men. In the 20th century, the Representation of the People Act in 1918 gave voting rights to some women and men over 21, but it wasn't until 1928 that all adults had the right to vote. And today, in the 21st century, the call for better democracy continues. The turnout in Mid-Dunbartonshire for this election was almost 72%, but many constituencies had a turnout in the low 40%, and the result shows a clear failure to engage a huge number of voters. So very quickly, I call on the government to consider the mandate that the result of the election gave them carefully, to treat every potential voter with dignity and respect, and make the change to give every vote an equal weight, no matter where it is cast. This is an opportunity to end self-serving and self-obsessed politics and truly introduce the politics of service. So I will join with my colleagues in this place to scrutinise government proposals and work constructively with them to improve the quality of life for my constituents and all residents of the UK who make up the rich diversity of our communities. Thank you.
Maiden speech, Luke Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to rise today to deliver my maiden speech as the Member of Parliament for Basingstoke. I'd like to congratulate those honourable members who have given their maiden speeches today, not least the member for South West Norfolk, of whom his dad would be very proud. Yeah. I would also like to recognise the work of my predecessor, Dame Maria Miller, who represented Basingstoke for 19 years. Maria was the first woman to be elected to Parliament in North Hampshire and worked hard to see more women sitting on these green benches and to promote women in all walks of life. Nationally, as Minister for Women and Equality and Chair of the Women and Equality Select Committee, she worked to champion shared parental leave, flexible working and support transgender rights. In the early hours of Friday the 5th of July, Basingstoke made another first, voting for change and returning its first ever Labour Member of Parliament. Yeah. It's not a privilege I will ever take lightly or for granted, but it's one I'm committed to making the most of for my constituents, the town and villages I represent, and for the country too, supporting this new Labour government in delivering the change that people voted for, not least on the subjects that we debate today, our NHS. It's also not a privilege I would have ever expected growing up. It's true my grandparents rubbed shoulders with members of this House and the other place. They included Harold and Mary Wilson, one of Mr. Speaker's predecessors, and various lords and ladies. But that was because my grandparents cleaned the mansion blocks in which they lived on Victoria Street. I hope to do Bessie and John Murphy and Elsie French proud. It's because of their extraordinary hard work and that of my parents, Liz and Sean, a carpenter and an IT manager, who left school at 15 with no qualifications, that I've been able to make it here today. My parents' hard work and dedication to my sisters and my education ensured we were the first in our family to go to university. And we've both sought, through public service, to ensure that others are offered the same opportunities. My sister, Jude, served as an army officer doing 2 tours of Afghanistan, and now I serving as the first ever Labour MP for Basingstoke. Because I've always believed that it is Labour governments that have done the most to ensure opportunity for all. Yeah. And I firmly believe people voted for their first Labour MP in Basingstoke this year for the same reason that so many people chose to move to our town and the surrounding villages, because they sought better opportunities for themselves and their families. Basingstoke has long been favoured as a place to move to for families and businesses alike, because of its location and good transport links. Around the town, the constituency boasts delightful countryside and picturesque villages like North Waltham, Dean, Oakley, Steventon, Moulshanger and Wootton St Lawrence. And it has a long and proud history. Our market, held every Wednesday, was fixed by a royal charter over 800 years ago. The town had an important role in the Civil War, with Oliver Cromwell himself turning up to end a siege, and Jane Austen danced at assemblies held locally. She would have been proud, no doubt, of the work of fiction we heard from him on the opposition benches earlier. Though I doubt she's ever had to undergo such a rapid edit on a piece of work as I have this evening. But Basingstoke has also suffered moments of notoriety, Madam Deputy Speaker. In the late 1600s, it was for burying the same woman alive twice. A lesson for us all in this House to never write off your opponents lest they make a stunning comeback. But it was the Basingstoke riots of 1881 that made national news, after a group rioted against processions of the Salvation Army because they feared their clampdown on what the Salvation Army called the demon drink. The riots led one newspaper to describe Basingstoke as a benighted little town which appears to be chiefly inhabited by a race of barbarians. The episode perhaps provides some valuable lessons for today, Madam Deputy Speaker. Don't believe everything you read in the papers and consider any public health measures wisely. I'm sure the Health Secretary is listening keenly. Since the 1960s and the Plan London overspill, Basingstoke has been transformed almost beyond recognition from the old market town. Now effectively a thriving new town, Basingstoke is home to many significant businesses and world-class employers, like the AA and Eli Lilly. But it's not just the big players. From renewable energy startups such as Tomato Energy to independent coffee shops and restaurants such as Willow's and the Gabardine, thousands of small businesses form the backbone of our economy, powered by the institutions that are shaping the minds of tomorrow, including Queen Mary's College and Basingstoke College of Technology. One of the key strengths of Basingstoke is its sense of community and the diversity within the town. We have a vibrant and active Hindu, Nepali and Irish community, and the strong community spirit is also evident in the incredible work of our local charities and voluntary organisations such as Home Start, Basingstoke Neighbour Care and the Café Dome. It is their passion, dedication and generosity that make Basingstoke such a special place to live, and I pledge to support their efforts in any way that I can. Nowhere will I work harder than in support of our NHS, the subject of which we debate today. I've seen firsthand the power of the NHS and the increasing strain, mismanagement and decline of the past 14 years. My dad has relied upon the NHS almost his entire life. Diagnosed with type 1 diabetes since age 17, he has suffered with complex and chronic illness, especially in recent years. I've seen the NHS at its best, saving his life twice after 2 stays in intensive care just last year. I will always be grateful for the care the doctors, nurses and other NHS staff gave him. But I've also seen, after many hospital visits, how much the system struggles to cope with providing high-quality care for people with multiple long-term conditions. In the election campaign, no issue was more prominent in my conversations with voters in Basingstoke than their being denied the health service that they rightly believe they deserve. So I'm proud of the focus of this government on building an NHS fit for the future, and I want to restore the fundamental promise of the NHS for everyone in Basingstoke, that it will be there when we need it. Securing the return of the family doctor is a popular and much needed policy locally, and I mean to ensure that we deliver it, just as I will continue to campaign for the delivery of our much needed new hospital. As a Labour MP, my guiding principle will be to fulfil the promise of this Labour government in restoring opportunity for all, whether that's through the NHS, education or tackling climate change. Opportunity is why so many people have made Basingstoke their home over the years. It's why they voted Labour for the first time just over 3 months ago. And it's what my parents and grandparents worked so hard for my sister and I. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak today. And I thank the people of Basingstoke for giving me my opportunity to serve.
Adrian Ramsey, 2 minutes, and I can squeeze in one more speaker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the new member from Basingstoke and hear about his pride in his constituency. Our NHS provides amazing, life-saving, dedicated care every day, but we also know that people are too often let down. Too many patients languish, often in pain, on long waiting lists. And in rural constituencies like mine, people often have to travel lengthy distances to access treatment. Lord Darzi points to systemic and chronic underinvestment caused by austerity in funding and capital starvation. Resilience was stripped from the NHS before COVID, and we owe it to those whose lives were lost or changed forever by the pandemic never to repeat these same mistakes and to do things differently. But the Chancellor's arguments about tough decisions and a black hole of 22 billion are alarmingly similar to those made by the previous government. And it's good to see the Chancellor signalling some movement on fiscal rules, and I hope this logic will apply to supporting our public services that are a crucial investment in our future. Putting well-being at the heart of what we do should navigate how we support the NHS in terms of bad planning, poor housing, weak transport and divisive social policies having a huge impact on health outcomes, for example. So whilst I welcome the Secretary of State's comments, he has been bullish about reform, and he hasn't been specific about exactly what he means regarding private sector involvement in the delivery of NHS services. And there are real reasons to keep the delivery of the NHS public and not to outsource to private providers. And the Secretary of State has made statements about using the private sector to reduce waiting lists, but doesn't explain whether he considers this to be a short-term plan whilst the NHS is being rebuilt or a permanent policy. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, Lord Darzi's diagnosis was helpful, and the emphasis on prevention is hugely welcome, but to deliver we will require bold action and investment.
Please be seated. Dr Peter Prinsley.
Madam Deputy Speaker, fixing the NHS is our great task and our solemn promise, for there is much to fix after 14 years of managed chaos and decline under the neglectful eyes of our mostly absent predecessors. The candid assessment of the state of the NHS from Lord Darzi is truly alarming, and as my right honourable friend the Secretary of State has said, it presents an accurate diagnosis of our difficulties. The report makes clear many of the problems of resources, management and structure, but today I'd like to speak up for medical research, of which this country has such a proud record. We all know of the catastrophic potential of infection, witnessed so very recently during the COVID pandemic. And indeed, like many of us new members, I too caught COVID, right here in this house, in the crush, to hear the King's speech. I do hope that honourable members of a certain age, such as myself, will remember to get vaccinated. But let us remember too Jenner, who devised vaccination, Lister, who pioneered antisepsis, and Fleming, who discovered penicillin. British scientists leading the fight against infection, probably responsible for saving more lives than any other people in the long history of medicine. Last week, we learned of the first successful trials from Oxford of vaccines for ovarian cancer, and we will see many amazing advances in the years to come. Today, we can be excited about molecular genetics, about artificial intelligence, and the huge power of our people's NHS data to unravel so many of the mysteries of modern medicine. I know that our government will develop bold plans to repair the embattled NHS. But on this day, I urge our brilliant new government to pledge also to do its utmost to support vital NHS medical research which carries such promise.
Opposition front bench, Dr Caroline Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm mindful of the need to be brief, but I do wish to congratulate those members for South Norfolk, South West Norfolk, Esher and Walton, Gloucester, St Neots and Mid Cambridgeshire, Mid Dunbartonshire and Basingstoke on excellent maiden speeches. When I first heard the government had commissioned Lord Darzi to conduct a report on the NHS, I wondered two things. Why has this report been commissioned? And why has a former Labour minister been asked to do it? The answer to the first question is still somewhat unclear after this debate. Much of the information is publicly available, and Labour have had access to the civil service for 6 months before the general election, as is routine to help with planning. Before the election, in their manifesto, Labour claimed to have a plan. The Secretary of State said he and the government have a 10-year plan to reform and modernise the NHS. In the draft I brought to this debate of the speech, I was going to say, I'm assuming this is the case, where is it and when will it be published? But during the debate, the Secretary of State said he will soon meet to engage with patients and staff who will write the plan. So, does it exist, or is it yet to be written? Given that Lord Darzi specifies that policy suggestions are outside the remit of his report, and notwithstanding the amount of time and dedication he's put into it, what primary purpose does it serve? Is it simply a political statement to cover the right honourable gentleman's plan and the increase in taxes from the budget when they come? The second, I won't give way because there isn't much time. A potential answer to the second question of why a former Labour minister has been asked to conduct the report is the report's silence on a number of issues. For example, on the increase in the number of medical students. I could not find any reference in the report to the 5 additional medical schools that were commissioned and opened by the former Conservative government, whose first new doctors have recently graduated. Indeed, I found no mention of the NHS workforce plan at all. My constituency mailbag, much like that of members across the House, is no doubt full of letters from elderly people, frightened that their homes will be cold this winter and that they will become ill or perhaps even die as a result. It is notable, and perhaps again answers our second question, that despite being published 2 months after the government's announcement about the winter fuel allowance, the Darzi report appears to be silent on this subject too. The Chief Medical Officer said, "Cold homes and fuel poverty are directly linked to excess winter deaths" in his annual report from 2023. Is it remarkable that this report by a former Labour minister doesn't mention cold homes? Perhaps it doesn't recognise the impact of such a decision because no impact assessment has been made. On the 29th of July, I asked the Right Honourable Member for Leeds West what estimates she had made of the impact her winter fuel payment changes would have on the NHS. Her answer implied to me that this was something that had not been given enough consideration. So on the 5th of September, I submitted a written question to the Secretary of State, asking him if he would do an assessment of the winter fuel payment changes on a range of factors relating to the NHS and health of elderly people, hospital admissions, deaths, GP appointments, and so on. The answer to whether he will do something or not is clearly yes, no, or I already have done it. It seems that the government struggled to answer this question, though, so I'd be grateful if the Minister could do so today. Will he make an assessment of the various effects of the changes to the winter fuel allowance and the consequent cold homes on the NHS and the health of elderly people? Earlier, the Secretary of State said investment without reform would reduce productivity. He even said that it was killing with kindness. But actions speak louder than words. What substantial productivity gains come with the junior doctor's 22% pay rise? None. What productivity benefits arise from a significant increase in the wages for train drivers? None. The NHS and government are now facing potential future industrial action from groups seeking similar pay deals. The government's willingness to take money from pensioners and give it to already well-paid train drivers suggests that such union demands will be successful, further creating a vicious cycle of industrial action that will ultimately be damaging to patients. Mr. Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, I fear that the party opposite sees the Darzi report as a political bludgeon rather than a blueprint for any meaningful reform. There are undeniable challenges within the NHS, something which I as a doctor see, and we must be honest about them. But instead of a constructive conversation on policy, Labour brings partisan attacks to the table. What we need now is real leadership, specific reforms and the courage to make the tough decisions that will keep the NHS suitable for generations to come.
Thank you. Minister Karen Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to thank all honourable members for their contributions to this debate. And we should all be grateful to Lord Darzi for his rapid and comprehensive review, though we still don't seem to know at the end of this debate if the opposition actually agree with the diagnosis or not. Essentially, it's evidence of their record and they don't like it. This has been a passionate debate with colleagues across the House addressing how 14 years of failure have damaged their constituencies, let down the people we represent and broken the NHS. Lord Darzi's report is as breathtaking as it is distressing. From the chaos unleashed by Andrew Lansley's top-down reorganisations, the plunge in productivity and patient satisfaction, the disproportionate impact of the pandemic compared to countries across the world, the failure to modernise ways of working, it beggars belief how the previous government allowed this to happen on their watch.
Yeah.
And behind every page of that report, we should remember the real-world suffering caused by the neglect. A record of missed opportunities and squandered potential. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is all the more galling for me as someone who's worked in the NHS at the time and still cares passionately about its survival. The reorganisation was in fact so bad that it led me to standing for Parliament. I wouldn't actually be here today if it wasn't for Andrew Lansley. Make of that what you will. When I worked for the NHS under the last Labour government, I saw firsthand the power of politics to improve the system. I saw a health service delivering the shortest waiting times and highest patient satisfaction in history. And since then, I've seen it decline in my constituency and the effect on my constituents. When the system lets them down, they have no other options. They can't afford to go private, they don't have the assets to sell, and their families are in the same boats. Health inequalities and inequality of access led me to join the health service. The Lansley reforms drove me to become an MP, and that's why I will not rest till we've completed our health mission to restore the fundamental promise of our NHS, that it will be there for all our constituents when they need it. The charge sheet is too long for me to make too much comments. I'm afraid I'm going to have to keep moving. I do want to, in the short time I've got, address the maiden speeches in particular. The Honourable Member for South Norfolk is someone I worked with in opposition. I was so delighted the next day to hear that he'd won. The global reach of South Norfolk, and particularly the productivity in the UEA, somewhere I went to myself as a student 40 years ago this week, astonishingly. They make a huge contribution to the economy of South Norfolk, and I know that he will be a good champion for them, and I wish him good luck on Send and Justice. South Norfolk is lucky to have him. The member for Esher and Walton, I think, made a really lovely history of her constituency and moved us all by the tragic story of meeting her constituents and the death of the 19-year-old son. She has kept her promise to that mother already in her place today. The member for South West Norfolk again is a worthy successor to his predecessor. He rightly highlights poverty, particularly in rural areas, and he spoke so eloquently about his father, his care, and sadly his death, an experience that many people will recognise and will be moved by in COVID. I'm pleased he's using that experience in this place. His dad and Councillor Thelma would be very proud of him. My friend, the Honourable Member for Gloucester, again, delighted to have another member from the South West, another Labour member of the South West. He's done a great campaign whilst having a young family. His passion and pride for Gloucester really shone through from the Romans, military, innovation. I actually didn't know Viennetta came from Gloucester. Shame on me. And wanting to achieve for all the people in the rich diversity of Gloucester. The Honourable Member for St Neots and Mid-Cambridgeshire, the first and longest serving member of his constituency. Long may that last for him. I look forward to him explaining black holes to us all. The member for Mid-Dunbartonshire, I mean, I think it's not a thing, but can I just say, for suited people coming to represent their constituency, she certainly wins that award. And she spoke movingly about her predecessor and the cost of caring for her partner as well. And finally, the Honourable Member for Basingstoke spoke really movingly about his family's hard work and dedication that led him to this place. Cromwell and Jane Austen would be very proud of his editing capabilities. Madam Deputy Speaker, in the minute I have left, there's an old Irish joke about somebody travelling down from the city to the countryside. He says, I can't remember, he's on his way to a wedding, he says, I can't remember how to get there. So he asks the farmer for directions, and the farmer says, I wouldn't start from here, but none of us want to start from here. This is where the last government left us, with a broken NHS, a social care system that's on its knees, and an economy that's failing its peeping. That's why early next year, this government will publish a 10-year plan that will set out how we deliver the 3 big shifts that will make the NHS fit for the future. My right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, said the choice before us today is reform or die. There are no quick fixes, but as Lord Darzi reminds us, the NHS vital signs are strong. We can tap into the immense reservoir of dedication and talent in our universities, life science sector, and above all, the NHS. Getting the NHS back on its feet will be a team effort. Working with patients and the public, alongside 1.5 million NHS staff, we will rebuild our public services, fix the foundations of our economy, and make our health service fit for the future.
We did manage to get in 16 speakers, even though we had a short amount of time due to front bench contributions.